Hello, good morning. Um, can you all hear me? I think you're on mute. No, we're not going to have any of those Zoom problems today because we're doing this in person, and I'm excited to be in person with all of you, many of whom I've seen you pixelated on Zoom, Teams, although I don't know why people use Teams, but that's for another day. But please get seated. There's plenty of coffee, breakfast in the back. If you have not had any, please go for it before we get started, and I'll just give 10 more seconds for people just to get situated before I begin. All right. Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you to the conference on the future of the US-Pakistan relationship. My name is Uzair Yunus, and I'm the director of the Pakistan Initiative here at the Atlantic Council South Asia Center. I'm personally very excited about the programming schedule for today and tomorrow. We've got an excellent set of panelists and speakers, many of whom have come a long way from Pakistan. So it surely will be a unique and different conversation. At least that's the hope on the relationship's future, both from a geopolitical and economic lens. We'll also be drawing, towards the end of this conference tomorrow, attention towards the need for cooperation on climate change, which is even more important given the catastrophic floods that have devastated much of Pakistan. Here at the Council, we've been leading some of the early assessment work that put the reconstruction and damages of the floods early on north of $25 billion, and the IMF and World Bank are adding more to those numbers with more granular data. So this is a huge catastrophe, and Pakistan will need a lot of help recovering from these floods. Before I introduce our first speaker, I'm just going to touch on three things that are important in terms of why this conference is important, the role of the diaspora, the American-Pakistani diaspora in this relationship, and what you should, and I hope you will take away from the events and discussions today and tomorrow. The conference itself is important in my view because after a long time, we're finally switching over and transitioning to a more normal bilateral relationship. Importantly, because Pakistan for the last many decades has been viewed from one lens or prism or another, and this transition is really important, and that's the goal, is to catalyze some of those conversations over the course of the next day or two. My hope is that we have vigorous debate and not the usual talking points, and many of you in attendance can let me know if that goal was achieved. And we need to talk about the baggage of history, but kind of move beyond that. I think that's important at this point as well. The diaspora itself, I'm an American Pakistani, and I think the role the American Pakistani community plays in this relationship should not be ignored or put to the side. Pakistanis in the US invest in Pakistani companies, startups. They've been at the vanguard of that. They contribute a lot in terms of education and healthcare, and most recently with the flood. So I think that's also important. But most importantly, in my view, the diaspora is important because it shows that Pakistanis thrive in liberal democratic societies where there is rule of law and free expression. And I think we should not shy away from that advantage that we get in living in the United States or other parts where there is a liberal democracy with rule of law and free expression. And finally, I'll just reiterate this point that the relationship is turning a corner. And my goal and our collective goal is that, and I'm in fact confident of this, that the conference will help you see the opportunities on offer in Pakistan for mutual benefit. But we should also approach these opportunities with the recognition that the goal should be that these opportunities create economic impact, inclusion for the many in Pakistan, not just a few, which has been a historical problem in Pakistan's economy. So with that, please allow me to introduce our first speaker, who is Fred Kemp. He's the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Atlantic Council. Under his leadership since 2007, the Council has achieved historic industry-leading growth in size and influence. It's expanded both its regional work as well as centers focused on topics ranging from everything to geoeconomics and the future of Bretton Woods to climate change. Fred, prior to the Atlantic Council, was a prize-winning editor and reporter at the Wall Street Journal for more than 25 years. In New York, he served as the assistant managing editor, international, and columnist. He was also the longest-serving editor and associate publisher ever of the Wall Street Journal Europe, running the global Wall Street Journal's editorial operations in Europe and the Middle East. He's the author of 4 books. The most recent one, Berlin, 1961, Kennedy, Khrushchev, and the Most Dangerous Place on Earth, was a New York Times bestseller and it has been translated into 13 different languages. With that, please join me in welcoming the President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, Fred Kemp.
Good morning to you all. It's so terrific just to, on a regular basis, be back together with humans, meeting humans, except for I did have a bit of a shock this morning. I have a teenage daughter, and she had green hair this morning, which she didn't have last night. But it's all in the spirit of Halloween, so it's fine. Before I start anything, I want to thank Uzair Yunus for building this initiative. I'll talk about this in a moment, but it's a quite different initiative. In this town, Pakistan's been seen through the prism of Afghanistan. It's been seen through the prism of security issues with India, but it hasn't been seen as a country of 220 million people, as a country that's the fourth largest English-speaking country, and as a place that has a really robust private sector, robust technology sector, and you're going to hear about all of these things later on this week. So we're really trying through this initiative to create a normal conversation about two incredibly important countries of strategic importance. So on behalf of the Atlantic Council South Asia Center, I'm just taking a short moment now to welcome everyone to this conference on the future of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. And along with thanking Uzair, I also want to thank Harris Samad, who's taking a photograph of me even as I thank him, Misha Iqbal, Emily Carl, and Mackenzie Clark. This is a really robust and great team. We have a can-do culture at the Atlantic Council. It's not, it's a culture of practitioners, people who are actually trying to move the needle on issues, not just observe issues, not just comment on issues, but to really take ownership of trying to move, in this case, this bilateral relationship along. The U.S. and Pakistan have been allies, have been partners since Pakistan's independence in 1947, and this is a knowledgeable enough audience to know that the U.S. was among the first countries to recognize that independence. And then in 2004, President George W. Bush recognized Pakistan as a major non-NATO ally. But as I was preparing a little bit over the weekend, I kept searching stories on Pakistan and the relationship with the U.S., and the term that came up most often was roller coaster. It was in Reuters. It was there were at least 4 or 5 dozen references to this relationship as a roller coaster. And in the Reuters piece, it actually listed all the points on the roller coaster, high and low and everything else. And I think what we would love to see is a relationship that can be more evened out, can be more consistent over time. And if we can contribute to that in some small way, then that would be terrific. We want to continue to work to strengthen ties and promote different areas of cooperation and engagement between our two countries, with a particular focus in this Pakistan initiative on trade, investment, and business-to-business ties. This conference also comes at a crucial time with the new administration in Pakistan and a U.S. administration here in Washington that is still in many ways finding its way with a desire to improve this relationship. In the last few weeks, the U.S. has stepped up to support Pakistan in the wake of the devastating floods that Uzair talked about. Almost $200 million in support has been provided by Washington, and it's clear that this is probably just the beginning of that. Over the last few months, there's been a flurry of activity with senior members of the U.S. government going to Pakistan and Pakistani officials visiting Washington. Thanks to the generosity of the ambassador, who I'll address in a minute, I've been able to meet many of these officials when they come to town and have had engagements with the visiting dignitaries during this period, which I think there is really no substitute for your senior officials coming here, our senior officials coming to your country. The South Asia Center's Pakistan initiative will be 1 year old next week, and we're happy to commemorate its founding with such an important conference over these next 2 days. When the initiative was founded, its goals were to mobilize support for a stronger U.S.-Pakistan partnership, to convene networks of influential policymakers for sure, but also business leaders and also civil society leaders to galvanize concrete action, and to develop substantive policy recommendations in priority areas that generate economic growth and create opportunity in Pakistan, and take some of those highs and lows out of the roller coaster so that it's a much more even and sustainable relationship. We do all this even as we are supporting a much stronger relationship. It also has to be done in the context of frank conversation and open conversation. We're looking forward to these conversations and would like to thank our partners, the NGRO Corporation. It's great to have the CEO here today, the University of Lahore and Johns Hopkins University for making this event possible. I'd also like to thank the Kazi Foundation, Affinity, and JS Bank for their support of the Pakistan initiative all year long. And finally, a very warm welcome to Pakistan's ambassador to the U.S., His Excellency Masood Khan. We're spoiled in Washington. We very often get countries' best and brightest coming here as ambassadors. But I think it's really a particular case with Ambassador Khan. I had the pleasure of a long conversation with the ambassador not too long ago. As many of you know, he was the ambassador to China, ambassador to the United Nations, and really one of the finest strategic thinkers on the set of issues that we're dealing with today. Every time I meet with him, I learn about global developments, about foreign policy, and the deep historical ties between our two countries. I look forward to hearing, and I'm sure we all look forward to hearing the ambassador's remarks about the future of the relationship and key areas of cooperation. So thank you all for joining us today. And with that, I'll turn over the stage to the Ambassador of Pakistan, Ambassador of Pakistan to the U.S., His Excellency Masood Khan.
Good morning, everybody. Mr. Dilawar Sayed, Special Representative for Commerce and Business Affairs, Mr. Fred Kemp, President of the Atlantic Council, Uzair Yunus, Ms. Dr. Rabia Akhtar, Riaz Khan, CEO of Anglo Corporation. It's a pleasure to meet all of you and talk to you. I begin my remarks by congratulating the Atlantic Council, Anglo Corporation, University of Lahore, and Johns Hopkins University for organizing this conference on the future of Pakistan-United States relations. It's a good combination and a good model for discussing Pakistan-US relations. One think tank, two universities, and a reputed corporation. This helps us put security and non-security issues on the table, with the economic agenda getting preeminence. And Mr. Fred Kemp, you have assembled an impressive cast here. I see many friends around the table from here, from the United States and from Pakistan. And I do want to pay tribute to you, to your leadership, for constantly trying to bring Pakistan and the United States closer and to promote understanding between the two countries. Let me answer your question. The prospects of Pakistan-US relations are bright, and our ties are poised to grow in future. This year, we have celebrated the 75th anniversary of our diplomatic ties, showing their depth and longevity despite ups and downs peaks and troughs, highs and lows, and roller coasters, which should be expected of any relationship, I'd say. The foundations for the strategic and economic partnerships that we laid shortly after the creation of Pakistan have served the interests of both the countries. Pakistan benefited economically and militarily from the US support. And together, we made the world safer through collaboration during the Cold War, by fighting terrorism, by being comrades in UN-led peacekeeping, and by jointly conducting counter-piracy operations, among others. We have been partners in war and peace. From the Cold War and post-Cold War periods, we have brought this legacy of cooperation to the era of a new technological age, which is constantly transforming regional and global landscapes. The spirit of solidarity between our two countries continues. In the past year, Pakistan helped the United States with massive evacuations from Afghanistan and continues to do so. To fight the COVID-19 pandemic, the United States has delivered 78 million vaccine doses to us, making it the largest donor to Pakistan. We appreciate that the United States has also provided $80 million to us to beat the coronavirus and build capacity for disease surveillance. Following the US troops' withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021, there was some uncertainty and disquiet about the relevance and nature of our relationship. Debates were held in Islamabad and Washington. Realists said right size or downsize the relationship. The pragmatists suggested to explore new avenues to advance mutual interests. Diplomacy since then has brought our engagement to an even keel, thus leading to public pronouncements by the leadership of the two countries that Pakistan-US relations have been de-hyphenated. De-hyphenated from Afghanistan, de-hyphenated from India, not AFPAC, not Indo-Pak, but Pak-US or US-Pak. We have been assured that even China would not be a new hyphen, a new prism for Pakistan and Washington. And what's more, we are strengthening our bonds. High-level visits and communication have given an impetus to our endeavors to recalibrate, re-energize, and rejuvenate our broad-based relationship. It would be a practical, pragmatic, and realistic relative without mismatch of expectations and attendant disappointments. The evolving parameters of this relationship are clear. Pakistan and the United States would continue to make efforts to stabilize Afghanistan, counter terrorism, and foster regional security. These are shared objectives. We welcome continuing direct talks between the United States and Kabul's interim government representatives. And Pakistan's role in this context remains important. For one, because Afghanistan is its immediate neighbor. There's immense space for Pakistan and the United States to engage and work together for crafting positive pathways as we forge ahead. Our relations with the United States will not be all about counterbalancing India. The US policy in the past has been based on regional equilibrium. There is no reason it should not be now. But Pakistan and the United States together are developing a singular trajectory with responsibilities in the broader region. The US relationships with Pakistan and India stand on their own as both neighbors are nudged to address their differences. We too believe that resort to diplomacy and dialogue will usher in peace and security in South Asia. The United States and Pakistan will be honest about each other's strategic calculi and imperatives. Pakistan has strong ties with China. We want to have a very robust relationship with the United States in all fields. At the moment, neither country has asked us to make a binary choice, and that's great. Many other countries, such as Indonesia and a growing number of the Middle Eastern countries, are in a similar situation. We believe in a harmonious strategic alignment because it will create a salutary environment for scaling up our bilateral ties, especially in the economic, technological, and educational domains. And we would ensure that geopolitics does not interfere with this framework. This is not merely aspirational. Hard work is underway on both sides to translate this into policy. The World Bank report, Pakistan at 100, Shaping the Future, envisages Pakistan as an inclusive society, an innovation-driven economy, and a trade and investment pivot. Let's look at that cusp. Pakistan is not what it has been projected to be. People are surprised when they are told that it has the fifth largest population in the world, some 230 million people, with 80 to 100 million in the middle class, a median age of 22, fourth largest number of Zoomers and millennials, fourth largest English-speaking nation, 120 million broadband subscribers, and hundreds of thousands of tech professionals. The entire economy of Pakistan is being digitized fast. These impressive demographic cohorts are under the radar screen. Global technology investors and venture capitalists, many from the United States, however, seeing the immense potential, are taking the lead in unlocking new business ecosystems in Pakistan, especially in the tech sector. Thousands of successful startups have sprung up in the past 2 years and are thriving in fintech, e-commerce, health tech, agri-tech, retail, transportation, logistics, supply chains, construction, and real estate businesses. Big VCs like Kleiner Perkins, Dragoneer, Tiger Global, and Accrue from the United States, Kingsway from the United Kingdom, Europe's Speed Invest, Gobi from China, and UAE's Sharook are all financing these ventures in Pakistan. Pakistan will become the next regional tech hub servicing Central and West Asia, Middle East, and North Africa. The United States VCs are already a big player in this emerging tech market. Scores of tech entrepreneurs from the Silicon Valley and all around the United States are raising funds for these startups. Most of them don't have to even travel to Pakistan because they can operate effectively from the cyberspace. The United States conglomerates and multinational corporations have been doing good business in Pakistan for decades. These include Procter & Gamble, Abbott, Cargill, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, to name a few, and they invest in energy, agriculture, pharmaceuticals, communications, and consumer goods. Altogether, there are 80 American enterprises which give jobs to nearly 150,000 people and sustain more than 1 million households. Their business experience in Pakistan is positive as they prepare to diversify their product lines for Pakistani population and for exports to regional markets. As we frame Pakistan-US relations for the future, we cannot underestimate the contribution of nearly 1 million strong Pakistani-American community, which has become a rock-hard bridge between Pakistan and the United States. Many amongst them who have excelled here are investing in businesses in Pakistan and the United States, carving new keystones for our enhanced connectivity. We would jointly build on their successes. 2 examples are here amongst your participants, Mr. Dilawar Syed, who holds a very high position in the State Department, and he went to Pakistan. And he opened many doors for Pakistan-US relations, particularly in the realm of trade and investment. And his visit was highly publicized. We have Mr. Sufyan Yusfi sitting here. And we would have Mr. Mohammed Kheshki later on, who's an entrepreneur, is one of the speakers during this conference. So just to give a few examples, how important the role of the diaspora community is. Our bilateral trade has been growing fast. Despite COVID-19 and other fluctuations, the United States remains the largest export market for Pakistan. Last year, our trade increased from $8.4 billion to $12 billion. Pakistan's exports went up from $7 billion to $9 billion, of which IT exports are $1 billion. To move to the next level of performance, Pakistan has a long to-do list, which includes macroeconomic structural reforms and ease of doing business. We have taken some far-reaching steps in that direction as we work to make our regulatory regime business-friendly by streamlining taxation, expediting profit repatriation, and enforcing intellectual property protection. We are proactively working with the United States government on business climate enhancement. And we are having a dialogue with the private sector on their concerns about a draft data protection bill that is there in the Assembly, but it has not yet been passed in Pakistan. I have heard many independent testimonies from US tech entrepreneurs stating that the State Bank of Pakistan and the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan are helping new startups to innovate and grow. And this is good news. Still, I would say we have a long way to go. To prepare them for the markets, we have to work on the quality and training of some 300,000 students, which include an increasing number of women who graduate every year from 200 universities of Pakistan. We also need to get access to international payment gateways like PayPal. Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan, as you know, has been devastated by recent climate-induced floods. 1/3 of our country, equal to the entire state of Colorado, was submerged in water, and 33 million people, comparable to the population of California, was affected. We are facing multiple catastrophes spawned by this climate disaster. With the help of the international community, which has estimated our current losses to be around $40 billion, we should be able to rebuild our destroyed or disabled infrastructure, houses, healthcare systems, and educational institutions. It's a daunting task, but I'm sure we would succeed. We thank the United States government for providing $97 million in humanitarian assistance to support our rescue, relief, and early recovery operations, and we value its commitment for help in even more critical phases of rehabilitation and reconstruction. We also thank American citizens, including Pakistani Americans and US businesses, for contributing another $27 million in cash or kind. The stark reality is that Pakistan emits less than 0.4% of global greenhouse gases, and yet it is the 8th most vulnerable country to climate change. This is not victimhood. This is scientific data published by Nature, Lancet, and World Weather Attribution, among others. As we ask for climate justice, we would work with the United States to leverage its technology and expertise to build climate-resilient infrastructure that would include hydropower dams and alternate energy plants. Some of this is already happening but we need to level it up. For our part, we have learned some hard lessons to prepare for a possible next disaster by reconstructing green, by revamping housing adjacent to riverine regions, and by redesigning our drainage systems and reservoirs. In the heyday of Pakistan-United States friendship, our two nations acclaimed American-supported Green Revolution in Pakistan, which affected the lives of common people, farmers in particular, consumers as well. We welcome the United States' recent initiative announced by Ambassador Donald Blum in Islamabad to launch our Green Alliance. This would be a successor to the Green Revolution. This would provide us an umbrella for our cooperation to develop weather-resistant hybrid seeds and promote linkages between our agriculture universities for research in GMOs, genetic engineering, and biotechnology. Distinguished participants, it would be a fatal mistake to ignore our obligations to work skillfully on conflict management and conflict resolution, regional deterrence, response mechanisms, and strategic stability. These areas should not become a blind spot because of the emerging security architecture in the Asia-Pacific region. We should not devalue the currency of confidence building and effective communication. It is important that we oppose violent extremism in whatever form it rears its head, including religious hatred. Bilateral and multilateral diplomacy on Kashmir should be revived. Sustainment of US origin legacy military equipment and an end to the ban on the sale of new defense platforms to Pakistan are a legitimate expectation as mutual confidence grows. Think tanks are the best catalysts for such conversations. The people of Pakistan and the United States share universal values of democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. Our relations should therefore be people-centered and beneficial for both nations. It's important to promote people-to-people exchanges, including by liberalizing our respective visa regimes. The more American officials, lawmakers, businessmen, students, entrepreneurs visit Pakistan, the deeper understanding they will have of the country, its people, and its neighborhood. Congressional leaders who visited Pakistan last year came back with transformed perceptions. We are grateful to the United States for sponsoring and supporting hundreds of Pakistani students' enrollment in American colleges and universities, including in the STEM disciplines. We have urged the United States to open these doors wider because the graduates from the United States academic institutions will nurture our friendship for decades to come. Pakistan cannot be stereotyped, nor the United States reduced to facile generalizations. Here we need to employ the tool of public diplomacy to dispel misperceptions and misgivings. For that, we need to develop a new lexicon and new expertise. We can hark back or look forward, and I'd say, let's look forward. Let's jettison anachronistic and toxic diction. Lincoln Centers in Pakistani universities are a good starting point. Let's have Pakistani chairs here in the United States universities. To sum up, and thank you so much for being patient. To sum up, I'd say have faith in Pakistan and have faith in Pakistan-United States relations. There's a compelling realization on both sides that we need each other. We will fulfill that promise. We deeply value the new energy in US diplomacy towards Pakistan, and we are reciprocating fully. There would be a pot of gold at the end of Pak-US rainbow. It's not myth. Together, we could turn it into reality. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Ambassador Khan. Hello and assalamu alaikum. I'm Sufyan Yusufi, Senior Advisor at the Atlantic Council South Asia Center. I'm also a partner at Deloitte, where I have the privilege of leading risk and financial advisories business for Deloitte's international development practice. It is my pleasure to introduce Dilawar Syed here today. He is the Special Representative for Commercial and Business Affairs at the US Department of State. In this role, Dilawar Syed is responsible for advancing trade, commercial, and economic policies for the United States and our people. Dilawar is an American Pakistani business leader, a successful entrepreneur, and a senior US government official. Previously in the Obama administration, Dilawar played an active role promoting the State Department's Global Entrepreneurship Program and connecting Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and innovators with emerging business leaders and ecosystems. He served on President Obama's White House Commission on Asian American and Pacific Islanders and chaired the White House Initiative on Economic Growth, on AAPI's Economic Growth Committee. In an impactful career spanning over 2 decades, Dilawar has built global businesses that are driving a major impact across technology, healthcare, and business services. Because of this experience, Dilawar has a unique perspective, hands-on experience, and a strong track record on economic development, entrepreneurship, and innovation. Dilawar was recently in Pakistan, where he engaged with a whole host of stakeholders and to further strengthen the economic partnership and bilateral trade between Pakistan and the United States. I believe that the timing is right for US and Pakistan to expand our relationship and take advantage of this historic opportunity to grow our trading partnership and significantly increase our mutual people-to-people economy. As Abraham Lincoln put it, the best way to predict the future is to create it. I, like many of you, am excited to hear Dilawar's thoughts on the future of US-Pakistan relationship, where he sees immediate opportunities to deepen economic and diplomatic ties, and how the US is and can further support Pakistan recover from the catastrophic flooding in the area. Please welcome my dear friend, Representative Dilawar Syed.
Thank you so much, Sufyan. Thanks for that kind introduction, and thank you for all that you do and for your leadership in the community on so many fronts. I'm grateful for the Atlantic Council for the opportunity to speak this morning. Ambassador Khan, it's always wonderful to see you, and thank you for your kind words. See your friend Kemp, great to meet you as well. And again, everyone who's joined us from Pakistan, I guess some of you are also streaming in, or rather listening in, you're welcome. I'd like to focus my remarks on the current state of our relationship. And again, the focus, as you saw in our earlier remarks, is very much on business and economy and trade, especially as we observe and celebrate the 75th year of our bilateral relationship. And second, I want to look to the future as to what is the promise, which I know many of you will indulge in that exercise over the next couple of days, and I certainly hope to share our thoughts with you. But let me start with something that other speakers also referred to, which I consider to be the most critical challenge facing Pakistan today. And these are the floods. I'm not going to repeat the stats that you've heard. You've seen the images. The reality is this is a heart-wrenching, an absolutely heart-wrenching devastation. the scale of which I don't think we have ever seen, humanity has seen in modern times. You know, when Foreign Minister Bilal Bhutto Zardari was visiting the UN General Assembly, we met on the sidelines. He shared a statistics with me that has stayed with me. At the height, at the peak of this displacement, there were 600,000 expecting moms who were rendered homeless under open skies. Let this sink in. 600,000 expecting mothers. Where are they now? What's happening to their children and their families and their communities? The dire situation of food insecurity, malnutrition, disease, waterborne diseases, malaria, dengue, education prospects. And by the way, let's be a reminder, these were already some of the most impoverished segments of society. So I can't think of a more compelling challenge facing the country, and also a more compelling opportunity for the United States to assist as it has done. So we have a lot of work to do there, and we will talk about some of the opportunities there. But as the ambassador noted, we appreciate your comments there. We are proud to be the largest single largest humanitarian assistance donor. From the very inception, we didn't wait. To date, the U.S. has funded $97 million of assistance. 30 million of that was announced last week by Ambassador Bloom in Islamabad. And much of that will go towards food insecurity, logistics for food distribution, and also, frankly, something that is very important. We've heard reports about the protection of women and girls as they have been displaced in this tragedy. We've also seen 17 U.S. planes ferrying supplies from the plains of Sindh. Administrative power was in the country, and she shares information via her wonderful videos, and we saw the incredible energy that we were deploying some of our best aircraft to ferry supplies across the lands that were devastated. And as we noted earlier, the Pakistani American community has, as it always does, shown incredible heart and generosity and energy, mobilizing $27 million worth of donations. And clearly they're going to have to keep up with this given just the sheer scale of this disaster. And I, for one, as a Pakistani American, feel very proud for this community's continued leadership. Now, we're observing the 75 years of our anniversary as a bilateral relationship. And you heard the ambassador talk about this before. There's something that we're very focused on within the state as we speak, to use this opportunity to build on what we have. Let me share a few facts that speak to the strength of our economic relationship, but I'm going to spend more time talking about what we need to do going forward. Number one, and as you may know this, and I've repeated this throughout my trip to Pakistan, the United States is Pakistan's largest exporting partner, largest market for Pakistani goods. Last year, the trade between the two countries increased by $600 million. DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, has been active in the country since 1975, since the days it was called OPEC. We have $450 million worth of DFC portfolio active in the country across a breadth of sectors: renewable energy, women empowerment, healthcare. One example that I find very compelling is a project I was reading up on. Khushhali Microfinance Bank has received $50 million worth of support from DFC to provide microfinance loans to underserved women in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Now, think about the thought that has gone into rolling out an initiative like that. That's the depth and the breadth of assistance that we're providing, which we all should feel very proud of, and again gives us frankly, a foundation to build upon. The third area that we feel that we have done a good job as two partners is around women empowerment. Only 20% of Pakistani women are in the workforce. That means 60 million citizens of the country have not joined the formal workforce. That's a large figure. And we feel very proud that the US-Pakistan partnership with respect to investing in women empowerment has been a steady one. This year, we're also celebrating the 10th anniversary of US-Pakistan Women's Council. There are public-private initiatives. We have an initiative with the Texas A&M University that has been very productive. And again, as I mentioned to you, there is actually funding that has gone into supporting women entrepreneurs, especially in the underserved regions of the country. On the health front, again, an area that we should feel very proud of. The ambassador talked about this. US donated 79 million doses of vaccine. That has saved literally thousands and thousands of lives in Pakistan. Often in places where there's already a lack of modern access to healthcare. And finally, an area that I personally feel very excited about, where we've done well as a tech entrepreneur, is on the technology side. The last 2 years, Pakistan attracted more venture dollars from global investors. A majority of them are US investors in the last 10 years combined. And that clearly presents a huge opportunity going forward. So as good we feel about this foundation, there is just so much more untapped potential. We've heard this repeated very often this morning. Pakistan is home to the world's 5th largest population. And now let me share with you another stat that might underwhelm you. The total FDI from the United States to Pakistan in 2021 was $159 million. Some startups raise more money. And therein lies the incredibly untapped potential in our relationship, where I've been focused on in my job and with the help of many of our colleagues and our ambassador on the ground in Islamabad. I spent a week in Pakistan during the summer as part of my South Asia swing. I was in Lahore, Sialkot, Karachi, Islamabad. I met literally hundreds of businesses, entrepreneurs, founders, innovators, small manufacturers. I went to places that senior officials often don't go to, in part to lift that middle swath of this massive country. By the way, that's our theme in every country we go. When I make trips, I try to go to places that is normally not visited. Because, as you know, the president has a huge focus on inclusive growth, both at home and abroad. And the spirit of entrepreneurship and innovation that pervades the country, that's in the DNA that I know many in this room are no stranger to, you could feel that. And that's what gives us a lot of energy about what more we could do with this relationship. There's clearly a lot of opportunity, but I'll also share with you a little bit on how we operationalize it going forward. So a few areas that we feel very excited about, and again, you heard some of this. Let me start with the launch of the US-Pakistan Green Alliance. You're going to hear a lot about this, and it's a good thing. Again, a lot of this has been spurred by the devastation caused by the floods. We are making deliberate attempts to invest in Pakistan's infrastructure that is more climate resilient, invest in the next generation technologies of agriculture in Pakistan that are more climate resilient. Ambassador Bloom is going to lead that charge. This initiative also allows us to tap into broader assistance and climate commitments the US has made. As an example, and this is a mouthful, the president's emergency plan for adaptation and resilience called PREPARE. We will be able to tap into that when it comes to Pakistan's building its next generation climate resilient infrastructure. DFC climate officer was in Pakistan, I believe, a couple of weeks ago, and he spent time on the ground talking to private sector, bankers, thinking about what kind of bankable projects that we could take on as we move forward. So we are talking about actual work on the ground, operationalizing it, not just, if you will, rolling an initiative. And we have to stay the course on there. On the energy front, let me say that's been an area that we've been often very much engaged on. Clearly, many of you follow Pakistan, you know there's a chronic shortage of energy, and that's a big inhibitor of its growth, both on the business-to-business front, but also on the consumer front. DFCs, there are two projects that I find, again, will give you a sense of the diversity of how we've thought about helping Pakistan's energy sector. DFC is right now financing a $45 million project to connect, to transmit power from wind power plants to the national grid. USAID has a $54 million worth of loan guarantees for underserved borrowers who want to invest in biofuel and solar energy. So when you think about these projects, they're pretty diverse in their scope and in their effort, and we're going to continue to be very thoughtful as we think about investing in the energy sector in Pakistan. We talked about agriculture. It's critical that Pakistan benefits from the latest and the greatest when it comes to seed technology. I've brought it up in my own meetings with Pakistani officials, including with the foreign minister recently, that GMO seeds presents an opportunity, especially as we tackle with historic food insecurity in the countries. It remains one of the few countries where the GMO seeds have not been adopted. And the US companies, big brands, are ready to invest. Also, with respect to the cotton crop, which I know will be affected, unfortunately, because of the water, because of the flood situation, there's also an opportunity to rely on more modern seed technology for cotton. The next area is technology, and something that I, again, feel very passionate about given my own background, and we should all feel very encouraged by the prospects there. But let me also share with you, there's a huge opportunity to improve the talent situation in the country. It's true that Pakistan is home to a significant youth bulge. But for Pakistan to really deliver on its own digitization needs and also develop global software products and services, it needs tens and thousands of software developers, software engineers, data scientists, AI experts who are globally competitive. It is very, very critical that we invest in STEM education for the next generation. And that work starts yesterday. It takes a generation to train. And an area that I feel pretty passionate about is we want to make sure it's done in an inclusive manner. We had extensive conversations with Pakistani officials that it's not just the urban centers or a few schools in the urban centers where you're training the next generation of STEM education. It needs to happen in the breadth of the country. And as you know, there is a significant underserved population where we have not seen that access to modern STEM education. That's the only way, that's the only, that is one of the main reasons why you'll be able to succeed if you were to deliver on the potential of the country's digital leadership. The final initiative that I want to share with you is around supply chain. And we've talked about this with the ambassador and his team as well. You're all aware of the dislocation that has happened when it comes to supply chains in the world. The president launched an initiative last year to encourage our allies to think of new exporting markets when it comes to strengthening our supply chain. So there are a few priority areas, and a couple of them could be of interest to Pakistan. And in no particular order, it's semiconductor and microchips. It's renewable energy, pharmaceuticals, small-scale manufacturers, auto parts, rare earth minerals, which I know Pakistan has good assets with respect to some of the minerals. Those would be new opportunities for Pakistan exporters to consider exporting to the United States. There is a breadth of programs and initiatives that have been rolled to encourage our allies to help us make our supply chains more resilient. So again, it just gives you just the sheer breadth of opportunities that exist here. Now, to deliver on all this, we're going to have to operationalize it. So let me just leave you with a couple of key asks. One, let me say this at the outset. In order to really accelerate our commercial diplomacy and put the relationship at the next level when it comes to our economic partnership, this has to be US private sector led. Let me repeat this. It will be US private sector led. The US government resources and support will always be there, but it is not going to match the sheer opportunity that is in front of us. Now, in order for the US companies to truly enter the market at the level at which they should, Pakistan will need to continue to upgrade its investment and business climate. During my visit to Pakistan, I met with then a finance minister. I had very productive conversations with the deputy governor of the state bank at the time, Murtaza Ali Shah Sahab, and we talked at extensive length about things like the repatriation of profits. And as the ambassador noted, there has been some improvement. We need to make sure we stay the course there. IP protection. Look, if you want to participate in a knowledge-based global economy, those laws have to be upgraded. There has to be a greater recognition of IP and enforcement in all facets of the economy. And let me also say, this is good for Pakistani innovators as well. You want to make sure that when you build a product, you're not worried about what happens if it's a knowledge-based product. So that's an area that is absolutely critical that the country upgrades its IP infrastructure, for lack of a better term. Third, we welcome that the private sector is being consulted on new drafts. We want to make sure the U.S. exporters are not faced with random import bans, which we saw earlier this year. Those unfortunately do not inject confidence in U.S. investors. And just to give you one small example of the level of interest and the hunger from the U.S. private sector, last week, my Office of Commercial and Business Affairs, hosted a direct line call. This is our flagship program in the State Department, where we connect U.S. ambassadors with U.S. companies, and when they talk about opportunities in regions around the world. Ambassador Bloom had a call along with leadership from the Pakistani Finance Ministry, and we invited U.S. companies. 80 U.S. companies showed up. 80 U.S. companies showed up. We had 2 weeks of marketing from our office. Again, just gives you how much interest there is, despite the noise at times. But it also tells you how much work we have to do. And when I say we, collectively, all of us, as a partner, we are here, we are standing by, we will continue to support, but much of the work also has to happen from the Pakistani officials. We appreciate the ambassador leadership, but also the diaspora and the stakeholders that are gathered here today. And two things that I would call out is, as you think about how do we operationalize this, how do we make sure these companies invest, we have to be inclusive in our approach. That's something I'm personally very passionate about. Pakistan is a big country, it's a diverse country, there's a vast middle. There is a lot of disparity in regions. We cannot just make sure, we have to make sure that whatever new gains we make, they don't accrue just to the few or to a couple of urban centers and a couple of industries, but they're broad-based. That's the only way the country can punch at its weight. The last thing that I would say, and the last ask I have, which is a critical one, is we also need your help to help build a more constructive narrative, that gives us space to execute on this. To build a relationship where you go from $159 million of investment to a much higher number, it requires a lot of work on both sides, a lot of intergovernment dialogue, and across both administrations. And you need to have space to be able to do that good work and make sure that we deliver on the potential of this relationship. So we feel good about where we are at year 75. We want to feel even better at where we are 75 years from now. As the Secretary said when we hosted Foreign Minister Bilal Bhutto Zardari about a month ago, we've been there with Pakistan as friends in the past in its hour of need. We are there, we are here today, and we will stay the course. Thank you again for having me. Appreciate it and wish you all the best in the next couple of days of dialogue here. Thank you.
Good morning. We'll just take a 5-minute break if you all want to grab coffee and a quick snack, and then we'll begin our next program. If I could ask everyone to begin retaking their seats, we'll begin our next session in just a moment. Hi, well, sorry, I'm right by the mic. Hi, welcome. No, thank you very much for coming. My name is Haris. Yes, yeah, of course. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for coming. Whenever you're ready, feel
This
free.
must be the grandest Pakistani man of the year.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
There has been quite a few this year.
Okay. If I could ask everyone to please retake their seats, we'll begin our next program in just a moment. Welcome.
Thanks. Thank you.
We're still waiting on. Good morning. My name is Haris Samad, and I'm an Assistant Director of the Atlantic Council's South Asia Center. Allow me to start by thanking Fred, Ambassador Khan, Sofian, and Special Representative Saeed for their fantastic remarks as we kick off this 2022 conference on future of U.S.-Pakistan relations. It's a pleasure to introduce the moderator for our first panel, Ms. Shamila Chaudhry, though she will introduce our esteemed panelists in just a moment for our first discussion on perspectives and commonalities in theaters of concern. I first want to talk a little bit about her. Shamila is a Pakistani-American trailblazer in the policy ecosystem who has worn many hats throughout her distinguished career. Most recently, she was appointed by Speaker Nancy Pelosi to serve as the Democratic co-chair of the Afghanistan War Commission. Previously, Shamila was president of the American-Pakistan Foundation, senior advisor to the late Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan, Ambassador Richard Holbrooke, the Afghanistan and Pakistan Director on the U.S. National Security Council, senior advisor to Dean Vali Nasser here at Johns Hopkins SAIS, and she's currently a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council South Asia Center as well, among her many hats. So Shamila, over to you. Doesn't sound like it.
How's this? Oh, very good. Although I don't need a microphone. I think everyone knows that. So I've been on this stage many times, and it's really nice to be back home. I spent 6 years at SAIS, and I was glad to see that SAIS and then also Atlantic Council, another home for myself and many of our friends. We're partnering together on this with University of Lahore and NGRO. These are exactly the kinds of events that we need more of to explore this relationship beyond the security lens that we've had for many years. And the security lens is really important, of course, but it needs to be put into a broader context. So I'm glad we'll be having that discussion today, throughout, and tomorrow as well. So the focus of this panel is to understanding perspectives and finding commonalities in different theaters of concern. And I can't think of any better speakers to address kind of the various theaters of concern, but also looking at things from a collaborative way. Not everyone does this in the foreign policy space. I think it's a unique quality, and it's something that we need to definitely teach our future generation of policymakers. It's something Dan has done in his time here at SAIS and now at U.S. Institute of Peace. So in the interest of time, we only have an hour, so I would like to just briefly go to each of the panelists, actually, and ask you to introduce yourself. Would that be okay? Okay, sounds good. All right, so we'll go to Dan first.
All right, just making sure we have enough mics. Dan Markey at the U.S. Institute of Peace, where I've been for just over a year. As Shamila mentioned, before that, I was here at Johns Hopkins SAIS teaching and running a program. Before that, the Council on Foreign Relations. Before that, the State Department Policy Planning. All along interested in Pakistan, U.S.-Pakistan relations, U.S. role in South Asia, and then increasingly China's role in the region.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rabia Akhtar. I'm Director Center for Security, Strategy, and Policy Research at University of Lahore. I'm also head of the Department for School of Integrated Social Sciences at the University of Lahore. And Pak-US relations is one of the areas that I work at. And so I'm happy to be here and collaborate with Atlantic Council and SAIS. And on behalf of the chairman of University of Lahore, Mr. Uwais Rauf, I welcome everybody to this conference on the future of Pak-US relations.
Thank you. My name is Yun Sun. I'm the director of the China program at the Stimson Center. Before Stimson, I was at Brookings. Before Brookings, I was at Crisis Group in Beijing back in the days. I only work on China and pretty much only China's foreign policy. So China's role in South Asia has always been an intriguing topic in my study. Thank you.
I'm Admiral Muhammad Afzal Tahir. I was Chief of the Naval Staff of Pakistan Navy from 2005 to 2008. And before that, I was Chief of Operations at Naval Headquarters. So I have a lot of insight into what happened in Afghanistan and later. So I'll be glad to share it with everybody else. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Admiral, I was glad to see your name on this panel because the cooperation between the American and Pakistani navies has actually been one of the most productive relationships throughout the course of the relationship between the United States and Pakistan. So it's just even better that you're here given your background and your experience. So I wanted to give a framing to this conversation because we talk a lot about what is strategic and what is not strategic, but we don't define it. And we often forget we meaning policymakers, analysts, outside experts, forget that a lot of foreign policy is rooted in primary and secondary kind of analysis or primary documents. And so when I think about the United States today, it's really important to, when I reference the Biden administration, I reference two key documents or moments in the administration. One is when Secretary Blinken introduced the Foreign Policy for America, right, in a speech at the State Department. And the second is the National Security Strategy, right? Every government should have one of these. And it took a couple of years to get there, but now we have that. So we have two kind of definitive points of reference to talk about the US strategy in the world. And I looked back at Secretary Blinken's speech, and there's some really, I think it's really important to remind ourselves of these questions that they introduced at that time in the context of this discussion. So there are three key questions I think are very informative, and we should keep in mind as panelists today. What will the United States, foreign policy mean for American workers and their families? We heard Dilawar Syed talk about this quite a bit. What do we need to do around the world to make us stronger here at home? And third, what do we need to do to make us stronger in the world? And too often, I think there's an assumption that the foreign policy of any country is specifically focused overseas. Surely when we're working on it, we think about it that way. We're a lot of us who are bureaucrats, we're in a very overseas mindset. I thought this speech was a very good attempt to remind folks, citizens, global partners, what is important to the United States in foreign policy. It was, I think, always important, just not emphasized. Now, this is premised on the assumption that American leadership matters, American engagement matters in the world. And we've all seen that wax and wane, and we've had our own opinions about that. But that's something that is underlying today's conversation about how can the US and Pakistan collaborate together in theaters of concern. It suggests that both countries still matter to each other, that some engagement and leadership matter in some way. So let's think a little bit about that as well. And then second, and we'll go to the panelists to hear their views. Second is the national security strategy. Now, there's no mention of Pakistan in the national security strategy. The name of the country doesn't show up once. But there's a lot of conversation about the region, Indo-Pacific, as well as Afghanistan. There's a lot of talk about India. So in some ways, the strategy is talking around Pakistan. But if you look at the themes of the strategy, looking at things like technology or great power competition or the challenge between populism and democracy or autocracies and democracy, I think within that, there's a lot of fruitful conversation that we can have about the US and Pakistan and how they can collaborate together. So if we can look beyond the fact that Pakistan's not explicitly mentioned in the national security strategy, there's actually a lot of fodder for us to talk about things collaboratively. And again, Dilawar did a really good job of getting into some of the details there, okay? So what I'd like to do is start first with Dan. Dan has, everyone here has experience teaching students, but Dan had the privilege of teaching students here at SAIS who were in government already and working on some of these issues. And so I thought, Dan could start out by telling us what he thinks of the word strategic. What does that actually mean in the context of US-Pakistan, and how do you define a strategic challenge?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, put on my professor hat again. So strategic often, I think these days, we use it a lot and we just throw it around as like basically means big, important, something that matters, right? So that's the loose way that we tend to use it. In a very technical term, strategic, as we used it actually in a recent report at USIP, strategic, and in this case strategic stability, means nuclear. It's sort of a very narrow context. But I actually prefer a kind of a third way of thinking about it, which has to do with strategic interaction, meaning something is strategic when it actually is both important, but when it's not just defined as an interest of one side in a relationship, where it's actually the interactive effect that really is at the core of it. So something is a strategic part of the US-Pakistan relationship, not when it just matters to Pakistan or when it matters to the United States, but when their mutual interaction is critical to seeing outcomes. That's how I think about strategic.
I was once in a war game kind of simulation where we were talking about strategic, and I was reminded by the facilitator that strategic means to have a series of steps that leads you to an eventual conclusion and a goal as well. And I think one of the most challenging things in being strategic in policy is being able to adhere to those steps given external events, right? And that's definitely something that has shaped this relationship perhaps more than others, is the confluence of external factors, geopolitical, regional, as well as bilateral. So Dan, what would you say would be the top three kind of strategic challenges for the relationship near term? So we're supposed to focus on near term.
Okay, well, I actually think I might have four.
Okay.
But we'll see. We'll see. Part of the challenge with being strategic is prioritizing, so maybe I haven't already done a good job with that. But and to remember it, I think about MNOP, so from your alphabet days. So M, simply money, finance, trade, the development, the economic component to this. I think we talked about that already some this morning. But this is strategic both, certainly for Pakistan. I mean, leaders of Pakistan who appreciate the direction of their country recognize the centrality of economic success to everything else, whether that's security or the fate of their people. But I think that it's also strategic for the United States. Pakistan, I think we often forget, but Pakistan is an enormous country. Pakistan's success, the success of its now hundreds of millions of people, likely to be many more over the coming decades, is actually important to the United States. So the financial and economic and development component is actually a strategic one. So I thought I'd lead with that. N is nuclear. The nuclear issue, and we can go on and on about this, but the nuclear issue is central to the US interest in Pakistan, making sure that these types of weapons are never used, but it is also central to Pakistan's sense of its own security, and it is at the core of Pakistan's security in the region. So that continues to be a strategic concern. O, this is a bit of a cheat, but I call it old issues. They're not that old, but Afghanistan, counterterrorism, these continue to be concerns. Just because the United States pulled its military out of Afghanistan doesn't make the threat of terrorism go away, as I think we are unfortunately likely to see in the future. Pakistan's role in that, both as a partner and then at times a very frustrating relationship in the region, will continue to be at the core of their strategic relationship. And then P is partners. And this is critically important because we have different partners. The United States, as you know, has what it describes as a strategic partnership with India that is growing and has become more important over the past 2 decades. Pakistan has a strategic partnership with China, which has, of course, also become more important, certainly over the past decade, has always been important. But the US-China relationship and the Pakistan-India relationship are quite difficult. So those partnerships and the interactive effects between them are going to be critical challenges for us going forward.
So one more follow-up question for you, Dan. You've offered these areas which I think provide a good framing for the relationship in any kind of temporal context. I mean, these are near term, but they could also be long term and do just fine. But what conditions need to be in place to help them succeed?
Yeah, I think we're at an interesting point in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. Obviously, all of us in this room would like to see us move forward. Some of us, I think, maybe would like to turn a page or to move on beyond past issues of concern. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure we've reached an equilibrium moment. I think we'll hear more about Pakistan's own politics, about the realities on the ground there. I think you need firm and established equilibrium of some sort, whether it's political or economic, to be able to have the confidence to move forward. And I think, at least as of today, I think we're missing that. So that's a condition that I think is necessary to be able to go to move to a next level. And I would also stress that my own view is it's been a rocky couple of decades. So trying to find narrow issues of cooperation, particularly on issues that are critically important and continue to be in the United States, will be useful. And then I think some of the core messages of this group already in terms of seeking alternatives, looking outside the standard government-to-government relationships are also potentially fruitful. That's where the private sector comes in.
I like that you use the word equilibrium. When I think of that, I think of obviously balance, right? So balance between two partners. But in order for that balance to exist, often we think of the importance of things like political stability, right? So in political leadership. And in the United States, we have an election every 4 years. And it is in that 4-year context, you often only really have 2 years to do good work on any bilateral relationship. The first year is spent transitioning everyone in, and then you have 2 years, and then the last year is spent transitioning out or planning for an election. So the political class is distracted. Similarly, in Pakistan, and as in any country that we have bilateral ties with, there's transition. And so this is what I want to talk to Rabia about, that because of Pakistan has gone through a lot of transition in the past year, but there's a lot of familiar faces. So there's something good in that, I think, but the transition can be, since it's outside of a certain kind of political cycle, it can be viewed as destabilizing. It also raises questions about what are the foreign policy priorities. Can you educate us a little bit about kind of that relationship between political transitions and stability and the foreign policy priorities of Pakistan?
That's a difficult question
It's
for
hard,
Pakistan,
yeah.
especially when you talk about stable cycles, election cycles here in the U.S. And nothing of that sort in Pakistan over a period of years. We haven't had that political stability. But if one looks at Pakistan's foreign policy priorities, as an academic, I would certainly want Pakistan to have those priorities which do not change with every government. Like there are some long-term foreign policy priorities that Pakistan should have, some short and medium as well. And it should not be party-oriented. It shouldn't be PTI's foreign policy, or it shouldn't be, PMLN's or PPP's foreign policy. But we have been short-sighted over a period of years, in fact, decades, where we have had personalized short-term goals, ad hocness in our foreign policy. And I would want to see that change as we go forward. With respect to Pakistan's foreign policy priorities, if I was to list them, then as a citizen of Pakistan, as an academic, I would want, for example, the first on my list, especially given the recent climate catastrophe, is for Pakistan to build relationships and alliances to mitigate climate risks, because it is right at the coalface. And that is not a short-term priority. It is both immediate as well as medium and long-term. If Pakistan wants to celebrate the next 75 years, then work on it needs to start now. Because if we do not consider it as a national security priority and as well as a foreign policy priority, partnering with other countries that are taking lead in it, I don't think Pakistan would be in a better position to survive what we are facing right now. In the second, order of priority, Pakistan's national security policy that was released earlier this year, had its national interest anchored in economic security. And Pakistan's trade and economic relations with its partners is one direction that I would certainly hope that Pakistan takes long-term. And Pakistan has the potential. We keep saying we have the potential. We need to realize that potential of becoming a transit hub for regional countries and continue trade and development activities, not only in Pakistan, but through Pakistan to Afghanistan, to Central Asian regions, and beyond our regional neighborhoods. So that will be the second order of priorities. And the third is regional peace and security for me. In order of precedence, you can argue Pakistan can have economic security if there is regional peace and stability in the region, but that's debatable. I believe that Pakistan cannot achieve its true potential if it continues to be tied with the most sanctioned countries in the neighborhood and fighting with the terrorist organizations at home and across borders, and with severe consequences for regional peace, hampering Pakistan to achieve the dividends of being a transit hub that it aspires to be. So here again, Pakistan's interests can align with the US, and they do align with the US, as long as they converge on ensuring peace in the region and helping Pakistan forge development partnerships and pursue regional connectivity, keeping in mind the global powers' geoeconomic interests, both in Central and South Asia. So we have that convergence with the US. We just need to translate it going forward. Instability in Afghanistan is one particular, thing that is holding back Pakistan already collecting dividends from projects like TAPI and CASA if they were to go through. Upon withdrawal from Afghanistan, the US, I believe, can maintain influence by creating a new agenda and strengthen cooperative relations with Pakistan and its neighboring countries that are critical for promoting geoeconomics. So altogether, this is how I would like to frame Pakistan's foreign policy priorities. I just hope that we have the political stability at home to sit down and look long term and see this is the direction we want to take Pakistan to. Do we have the capacity internally to do it? And which are some of the critical partnerships in the region and also with the US that will help us achieve those goals?
That's a lot to think through, and I'm intrigued by your connection between economic stability or economic security, as you said, and the regional peace issues. Now, you could argue that there hasn't been regional peace for a long time, and Pakistan has gone through downs and also ups in its economic situation, right? It has thrived as well as suffered in recent decades. Can we pick that apart a little bit? What aspect of is there a nexus between the economic issues and the regional peace issues that the US could be involved in that could be helpful to Pakistan? Is it on the bilateral trade issues? It doesn't have to be India-Pakistan bilateral trade, maybe it's Afghanistan. I'd love to kind of hear and also, like, is there support for this inside the kind of Pakistani foreign policy elite thinking about it?
I'm sure there is an interest in Pakistan to use, or not to use, to make US realize as to what's important for Pakistan. And so what's important for Pakistan to thrive economically is obviously the money aspect that Dan talked about. That is the overarching thing. But when you break it down when Pakistan says that it has the potential to be the transit hub, what does it actually mean when you deconstruct economic security and the dividends Pakistan wants to accrue from that? I think investing inside Pakistan and then also helping Pakistan, in the broader China-Pakistan economic corridor, the special economic zones. China doesn't tell Pakistan to not invite US to be a partner in those SEZs. I think that is one area where US investment can come in. We do not have, there's a lot of talk about technology and all, but we do not have any Make in Pakistan initiatives in the technology sector. So probably companies could be invited in Pakistan to, start those Make in Pakistan initiatives from which, will create jobs for Pakistan as well. In the broader security, domain, so U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, I personally believe, the language that everybody wants to use, like U.S. leaving Afghanistan high and dry, like it reminds people of the Cold War days as well. So I think United States still has the potential to continue the dialogue in Afghanistan, even though it is not happening inside Afghanistan, it's happening in Doha. It is important for Pakistan to, be a partner in all of that and creating that space where, peace in Afghanistan is going to be very, very important for Pakistan as well. So in any capacity that Pakistan can help the US, take this dialogue forward, where US is not probably directly investing in Afghanistan, but investing in the broader peace and security architecture in the region. And I think US lead in that is important for Pakistan. We want United States to think that, with that peace and security architecture that US gets to lead, not only benefits the US in the region, but also regional countries like Pakistan, like Central Asian republics, and broader Turkey, Iran, and other countries. So if we don't have peace in the region, I don't think that Pakistan will be able to do much on the ground. So I do see US leadership role in that aspect as well.
I mean, you're very intentional about your use of words and saying U.S. leadership, and that's key because it's referenced, as I mentioned, in these, in Blinken's speech and also in the national security strategy. I forgot to say something. So I'm sitting here in my personal capacity, not as the co-chair of the Afghanistan War Commission. So I know if there's media present, that please. I'm not speaking on behalf of the commission, so don't want to get in trouble before we've started our work. We actually have a good segue into talking to Yun about China. Rabia rightfully mentioned that China gets referenced quite a bit or invoked in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, and China, unlike Pakistan, is referenced well over a dozen times in the national security strategy and also in the speech about American foreign policy at home. So tell us, how does China see the U.S.-Pakistan relationship? And is Pakistan's relationship with the Americans any factor for China?
I think it is a factor for China's overall strategy towards South Asia. But in terms of Pakistan in particular, I would say China has plenty of confidence that this relationship is going to continue regardless of the modality of the U.S.-Pakistan relations. But having said that, I think there has also been adjustment and recalibration of China's policy and expectation towards Pakistan, especially in terms of the CPEC. And I think from that recalibration, there is almost a welcoming attitude in China that Pakistan should rebalance its external strategy. And there's a welcoming attitude that Pakistan is reaching out to the United States again because this readjustment of Pakistan's expectation and external alignment strategy indeed has much approval from China. But this also says something about China-Pakistan relations, and especially in terms of the CPEC project and the difference of the expectations between China and Pakistan. Again, the Chinese don't believe that a realignment or recalibration of Pakistan's relationship with the United States is necessarily going to come at the expense of China's interest in the region, because by the end of the day, India is still there. And by the end of the day, CPEC will remain one of the most significant economic campaign in the country, regardless of how people feel about it. But then last point I'll make is that, well, we know that China-US strategic competition, that forms a context and background of China's policy towards almost everything. So when we look at China's reaction towards the recent, for example, events between U.S. and Pakistan, especially the senior level visits from Pakistan to Washington, D.C., I think the Chinese reaction is more about what U.S. has said rather than what Pakistan has committed. So, for example, on the proposal that from the U.S. that Pakistan should renegotiate its debt with China, I think Beijing's reaction is that's none of your business. And we have seen multiple analysis from China categorizing that as a U.S. intent or U.S. plan to sabotage China-Pakistan relations. And their following reaction is that, well, don't talk about China-Pakistan, talk about what kind of investment that will be coming from the United States towards the country. So it is more important, I think, the Chinese would argue, it's more important for U.S. to pick up its own actions rather than badmouth China-Pakistan relations. Thank you.
So Dan, I'm going to put you on the spot. Is it none of our business?
Well, that was out of nowhere. I mean, at some level, of course it's our business in terms of, as you know, if we look at a relationship with Pakistan, we look at its debt burden, and we have concerns about the growth of its economy. We see needs and requirements. We see Pakistan going to the IMF and other lenders. And so, of course, it's right for the United States to ask questions about the other forms of debt that Pakistan holds, which include from China. So in that respect, it's very much our interest. And the gap in transparency on some of these loans, and particularly the way that they've gone about them, is also critically important to us, not just in Pakistan, but globally.
I just wanted you all to have a flavor of what it's like to sit in the bureaucracy. No one would ever ask that, by the way. but you want to ask that. Okay, I want to go to the Admiral, and we will open it up for a few questions as well. So get ready for your questions, and make sure they are a question, okay? And feel free to talk to the panelists afterwards, but we're looking for questions. So Admiral, the security environment in the region is actually one of the issues I think that both countries are quite aligned on in some respects at a macro level. There's an interest in Pakistan and the United States both to ensure that certain non-state actors, certain militant groups don't threaten their states. So that, I think that's pretty clear, and it's well acknowledged. But could you give us, to have that kind of collaboration post-war in Afghanistan for the U.S. and Afghanistan, or U.S. and Pakistan, it requires a certain amount of trust and partnership that perhaps has eroded over time because of the global war on terror. So I guess first, in order to have a collaborative relationship, we must acknowledge what we've learned, or even if there are any lessons observed. And I don't think people in Washington get enough of this. Like, what conclusions has Pakistan reached after working with the United States in the past 2 decades on security issues?
Okay, let me first say, and this is with apologies, there was talk about baggage of history. So unless we get rid of the baggage of history and learn from it, we cannot move forward. As far as I am concerned, I was a young sub-lieutenant in 1971 and saw all the happening. So that is all ingrained in my mind, what happened, what should have happened, what didn't happen. So that, and then also Afghanistan, and then, Soviet Union, Afghanistan. So we must not, push the history under the carpet and think that it's all going to be okay. It's not. We may not say so, but we always have what happened in the past 30 years, 40 years, 50 years in our mind. Coming to your question, as far as relations between Pakistan and US, it needs another event. When there is an event, there will be relations will be good. When that event is over, we will be back to, from being a cornerstone of the US policy in, I don't know, many decades ago, to the most sanctioned country in the world. So I think what I want to say is that relationship of Pakistan with US, the world cannot live without US. That is, we must admit, everybody must admit. But then the next step is that it should not be a one-sided relation. And it should take into account the concerns of the other party. It is a very difficult topic that you have given me, and I have said these things which I think are relevant. I was a young commander, and we visited in 1988. We were on a staff course visit, and we could see at that time a shift of US to India. Now, India is very sensitive issue for us for all the reasons that we all know. It doesn't have to be elaborated. And come Quad and other things, so that aspect has been further accentuated, and we feel that, it's not really, comfortable for us to use the word. In the maritime domain, we had very good relations with the US. I trained on US platforms. My first appointment was on a US platform. But 50 years later, or even I think 60 years now, later, there is not even one naval platform, US origin naval platform in Pakistan inventory, except for, I think, P3s. I don't know what is their status at present. So that is the journey we have traveled from 1975 or 1971 to today. And it has, once these platforms were not available to us, we had to do something, so we went to China. And I personally think all the three armed forces of Pakistan cannot now go back. If it has taken 50 years to come to this side of the pendulum, it will take us 50 years to go to that side of the pendulum if US is interested. So US relations with Pakistan are, I think, event-based, contingency-based. We have had 75 years of relationship, and I don't think we have developed an enduring partnership, so to say. There are always concern of our nuclear, assets or various other things, But I think our perspective must be understood and given weightage, and within that parameter, there can be changes. There can be, alterations, there can be amendments, and so on and so forth. On a very, very broader plane, for Pakistan and India relations to prosper in the future, we have to have two things. Parameters of that relations, P-A-R-A-M-E-T-E-R, parameters, and perimeter of those relations, P-E-R-I-M-E-T-R. And the two countries should not go outside that perimeter, not indulge in religious matters, not indulge in other aspects which we suspect happens. No, I may be wrong, but this is our perception, and our perception must be clarified somehow. So these are the, in a very, very broad term, I would say that we have to set parameters and a perimeter of our relationship. And then it should be a reasonable, expectation, and because we have our own compulsions. Talking of historical baggage, we saw that in 1988, when the Soviet was demolished, Union was demolished, everybody was happy but Pakistan. And nobody gave a, whatever to what happens to Pakistan. And we have problems emanating from that experience. Even today, 3 million Afghan refugees, now they are wanting, for citizenship for children born in Pakistan, and so on and so forth. So these are the demographic problems and societal problems that will that are still haunting us after I don't know, 12 and 32, 34 years.
So, Admiral, you mentioned that this relationship is event-based, and we could argue that the U.S. withdrawal last year was an event that triggered a new space or ecosystem for the relationship. If you had to think of 2 or 3 areas of cooperation that the U.S. and Pakistan could focus on security matters now, what could those be?
You see, it's been said again and again, Pakistan cannot handle a two-front situation, India and Afghanistan. It is simply not within our capability, monetary capability or military capability. We cannot do it. So that is the first and foremost, is that we should have a mental satisfaction that nothing will happen from the western border, as indeed you have posed me a question and I want to touch it. For the first few years of the Afghan invasion, or whatever you call it, I'm sorry for using the wrong word if it is, we had started to have concerns. There was, the terrorism was increasing, there was suicide bombers in every cities, villages, towns, mosques, and Shiite mosques, whatever they are called. And our perception was that if US is controlling that country militarily, some part of it, and politically some part of it, as for backing the, the regime in Afghanistan, why is all this happening? So we came to a conclusion that this is probably purposefully being done. So that is the difference, that, that is the shift that you would see in, 3-4 years down the line from the first attack on. And talking of that, why history is important, why we have apprehensions is, I was chief of naval operations, chief of operations in the naval headquarters, and we were sitting with the American counterparts, our army, myself, and Air Force, and how to manage the airspace and how to manage the sea space for the, eventual. And would you believe that on the day, I think it happened at 8 o'clock, if I'm not wrong, 8 o'clock at night, I got out of that meeting and I didn't have the time to inform my chief of naval staff even that this is going to happen. And when I did go to his house and I said that this is going to happen, he says, I have already seen it on the TV. So, these are the things that make us uncomfortable, let's
Sure.
say.
So thank you, sir. So we have just about 10 minutes, so I want to take a few questions from the audience at the same time, and then we'll pose them to the group. Okay, Razi in the back, please introduce yourself as well when you ask your question. Is there a mic to go around, or? Would you like to take one of ours?
Good morning. My name is Razi Hashmi. I'm in the Office of International Religious Freedom from the U.S. Department of State. With the Biden administration centering of human rights and shared values around the world, one of the theaters of concern for our office is, of course, religious freedom and the protection of religious minorities. How do you see progress in this area, and what should we be doing both on the United States and the Pakistan side that we're not already? And how do you ensure equal protections under the law to all those who proudly identify as Pakistani, but they may not identify as part of the majoritarian faith or sect? Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Razi. Let's take another question. If there is one.
My name is Satvik Pandyala. I am a student at GW. My question is, with the recent national security strategy released, in it, it details a lot of U.S.-India cooperation when it comes to countering Chinese influence on the border and in maritime security in the Indian Ocean. What concerns for Pakistan are there in this domain, and in what ways do you think the U.S. and Pakistan can make sure that the U.S.-India cooperation does not impede on Pakistan-U.S. cooperation?
Good question. One last question in the back there.
My name is Roger Cochetti. I am a SAIS alum and an author. And my question has to do with this sort of elephant in the room, Imran Khan, and any panelists care to talk about, if Imran Khan were to return to office, the effect it would have on Pakistan's relationship with the United States, or Pakistan's role in the world, or Pakistan's relationship with China, or any of the topics that have been discussed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to take the right of the moderator to call on people. Rabia, what do you think about this question about U.S.-India cooperation?
So obviously, whatever happens in the Indo-Pacific is of concern to Pakistan. And in recent years, the strategic alliance and the way it's taking shape between India and the United States has implications for Pakistan as well. Agreements like BECA and other logistic agreements definitely, will have impact for Pakistan as well. I think the main concern would emanate from any direct confrontation between China and United States in the Indo-Pacific. If there are any lessons that United States can learn from developing partnerships over a period of years, and as to how India has maintained its strategic autonomy, it would be careful to put all its eggs in the India basket. And I think there is a growing realization about the credibility of India as a partner to counter China's assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific. But as long as there's no direct confrontation that happens in the Indo-Pacific, I don't think that Pakistan directly gets impacted. But overall, the security situation in the region, the modernization that India is undergoing with its defense and military, obviously with the US help and money, obviously directly impacts as to how Pakistan will have to recalibrate its own security calculus going forward. So that would be my short reply.
Thank you, Rabia. Admiral.
I will just make one comment, and this may be tongue-in-cheek. You have, US has agreements with India which are said they are benign, they are logistics and things like that. Would US allow Pakistan and China to have the same agreements? That is one comment. The other is, I think there was a talk about some religious minorities and so on and so forth. This is a matter, is a problem that we are carrying for the last 1400 years. It's our mistake, our failing, that we have not been able to resolve this Shia-Sunni difference. But by and large, barring a few incidents that are localized, the Shias are well treated. There are very senior officers up to the 3-star rank in all the 3 services of Pakistan who belong to Shia community. My own wife is Shia. I'm sorry to give a personal example because it's not very nice. So yes, there are problems. There are problems with Christians. There is a blasphemy law that is misused. We agree, yes, that it is misused. But then it is the courts. We cannot, control, who can control the courts? I mean, I'm sure we don't want the army to control the courts, or the Navy or the Air Force. The courts are independent. They take a view and they say hang someone and free someone. It is their wish. So I think this is, I said perimeter. So this is outside the perimeter that I have in my mind.
Yeah, to your point, I mean, there's definitely a cultural and a social aspect to the lives of minorities in Pakistan, which you spoke to, and I've heard what you've shared from many others throughout the history of Pakistan, and it's changed. In the 70s, in the 80s, you could argue it was very different between Sunnis and Shias, and there was much more. There's much less of this in some ways, but this is very debatable, all of it, but I think that the complexity around it and the difficulty when it becomes a bilateral issue is precisely the issue of the judiciary, if it is in fact free, and the legal frameworks that often can lead to very difficult, very public situations. So there's a lot of work to be done, I agree. One additional observation on the India question. Interestingly, the time I served in government was, again, when the US was in Afghanistan, and there was a lot of partnership happening on the defense side between the Americans and Pakistanis, and Americans were selling a lot of defense equipment and material, and the Indians had the same concern that Pakistan now has, which is, what are the material defense benefits that India is getting out of the current Quad relationship? Indians had this very similar concerns during the War on Terror about the U.S. selling frigates to Pakistan and selling, F-16s and all of that. So again, we go back to this India-Pakistan issue and its overbearing kind of role kind of in the bilateral, which even if you say it's dehyphenated, you can't get away from it. So does anyone want to address the Imran Khan question? Sure.
So yeah, certainly the elephant in the room. So Imran, the optics of it, as to, as you might look at the news and see, is, came out with initial statements about regime change and US role in it. But later on, you saw him backtrack on US role specifically, and then making comments about how important this relationship is to Pakistan broadly. So whatever, statements that are coming out now, and to the time that he wins the elections, if he wins the elections and if he comes to power again, that seat has its own limitations, and he has seen that while he was in power. This is a very important relationship, and from the Trump time to Biden's time and US withdrawal from Afghanistan, it was all under his leadership. And the relationship was working fine. So I think once he will get to that, state again, where he is in power, the limitations of being the Prime Minister of Pakistan will bring him back as to how this how important this relationship is and how he can make it work. For now, there's a lot of popular sentiment against the US on the streets that we see in the rallies and all. And that's all, suffices well for the rhetoric that is needed probably to propel him to the seat of power again. So I wouldn't, call it a very drastic shift, because we've seen him go backtrack on his own statements about the centrality of this relationship for Pakistan in the region. Thank you.
Wonderful. Any final parting words from our panelists? Dan?
I'll just pick up on that just really briefly. I mean, look, I think the United States intends, as long as this political drama plays out, and of course I don't speak for the US government, but my every sense is that they will try to steer clear of this as much as they possibly can, because they recognize it as being radioactive and unhelpful either way. But the same, there's a truth to the unhelpfulness on the Pakistani side. It's one thing to recognize that there's an undercurrent of anti-US sentiment. It's another thing to play into it directly, repeatedly, and to harp on it and to mobilize on it. It's unhelpful. What else can I say? I mean, it's a choice. It's a tactic. I think that it has a corrosive effect that is likely to outlast whatever political benefit it has, and then we'll be stuck with that. And this is not a news story, but I think this is another chapter in it. It is reflective of the depth of that history, but this is counterproductive for the relationship.
All right. I want to thank our panelists and to our hosts for allowing us to have this wonderful discussion and for the great questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you very much. We'll start our next panel in just a moment, everyone.
Amir Hashmi.
It's very nice to meet you.
You.
If everyone could please take their seats, we'll begin our next panel in just a moment. Thank you. All right. If I could ask everyone to please retake their seats, we'll begin our next panel now. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Uzair Yunus as the moderator for our next discussion on economic opportunities in the tech sector. Uzair will introduce our esteemed panelists in just a moment, but first a bit about him. Uzair is currently director of the Pakistan Initiative at the Atlantic Council. He's also vice president for South Asia at the Asia Group. Previously, Uzair was the manager for engagement and strategy at Tamiri, a director at Albright Stonebridge Group, and he's also consulted with Deloitte and IBB Consulting. His unique skill set combines private sector consulting and tech expertise with policy and intellectual leadership on US-Pakistan and US-South Asia engagement. And though it goes without saying, Uzair's vision and leadership are the reason that this conference came to life. So, Uzair, over to you.
Hello. Okay, now you can. Thanks, Haris, for that introduction. And again, thank you to all of you for taking out the time, for our panelists for joining us today. We just had a geopolitical discussion, and we figured that, right before lunch, we changed things up a bit and talk about what, in my view, is perhaps a beacon of hope in Pakistan's economy, where the macroeconomic picture, the headlines, the conversations around debt restructuring, et cetera, are quite dire. To say the least. The tech ecosystem continues to show what is possible and what is happening in Pakistan, which is a dynamic market, an innovative market, and a market that, frankly, for many years has been ignored. And at the Pakistan Initiative, when I started about a year ago, and Irfan and I and others on the team sort of developed a strategy, we focused and decided to focus extensively on the tech ecosystem. So I'll do a shameless plug before I begin that you should check out our latest report on the state of the Pakistan technology ecosystem. Has some recommendations given the fact that this is a tech winter that has just begun. And capital is not cheap anymore, and things are slowing down a bit. But in my view and the view of the roundtable panelists that we had in terms of conversations, the focus was that when there's a downturn, it's actually the best time to improve yourself and get in place more building blocks so that the next upturn, things improve. So please do check that out. And just in terms of where the tech ecosystem, broadly speaking, is, in fiscal year 2022, according to the State Bank of Pakistan, Pakistan exported roughly $2.6 billion worth of IT services to the rest of the world. And as you heard initially, almost $1 billion of that came to the United States. This was 25% higher than 2021. And this year, people expect that the exports will cross the $3 billion mark. So it's really having a very high CAGR in terms of its growth. At the same time, startups in the country have raised $730 million in the last 7 years. That's according to Invest to Innovate's Insights Lab. But as you also heard in the morning, 70% of this funding was realized in the last 2 years alone. So lots of momentum, lots of energy, and even with this crypto and tech and other winter that everyone keeps talking about, Pakistani startups are attracting a lot of global capital. Today, we have an amazing panel to talk about the state of play, what's happening not only in Pakistan, but what Pakistan can learn from other emerging markets that perhaps are more mature. Starting us off will be Amir Hashmi. He most recently served as the founding chairman of the Special Technology Zones Authority in Pakistan. STZA, as it's known, was established to promote knowledge-based innovation ecosystems in the country. Following Amir will be Monica Brand-Engel. who is co-founding managing partner of Kona Capital. Monica is an investor and an entrepreneur, as well as a wife and mother of twins. Monica has launched funds and products aimed at broadening financial inclusion globally. Shazia Khan will follow Monica in terms of the opening remarks. Shazia is the CEO and co-founder of Eco Energy Global, a tech company accelerating the adoption of solar in emerging markets through a lending-based fintech. She has 15 years of experience building Pakistan's solar energy market, including as a leading pay-as-you-go solar provider. And last but definitely not least will be Mohammad Kheshki, who is founding partner and CEO of the Resource Group International, as well as chairman of IBEX Limited, which is listed on NASDAQ, and chairman of TRG Pakistan Limited. Previously, Mohammad was chief operating officer for TRG International, where he saw the company's day-to-day operations, including management and oversight of its portfolio of direct holdings. With that, Amir, I'd first invite you to kick us off and share with us a bit of the recent developments in Pakistan's technology ecosystem, in particular, maybe touching on why the STZA was a necessity and what has been the state of play in terms of the STZA and its mandate and its impact in the market.
Sure. Thank you, Zair. Good morning, everyone. Really excited to be on a panel talking about technology because prior to my appointment as chairman of the Zone Authority, I was with a think tank for 10 years. And we never got around to talking technology, but spent a lot of time with China and what demand base they had in Pakistan. But my career was actually started in the Americas, Silicon Valley, and then with IBM. So I'm going to give you a perspective of what the demand base looks like, what the tech ecosystem looks like, why the zones were a necessity, how the legislation was passed. A lot of information. I'll try to do it in 5 minutes. So Pakistan, I got back to the country about 19 years ago. And Yas also, of course, he's the CEO of a large industrial conglomerate now, but he was actually in tech. He was my colleague. He was on the product side, and I was on the services side. So we go back a long way in understanding of why there wasn't, I'll summarize it as an enabling environment in the country. So the biggest barrier to technology growth was the government itself, right? And this is my own experience in the last 19 years. And we could not create an enabling environment, whether it was the State Bank of Pakistan, whether, if you've probably heard, most of you who visit Pakistan often, is the FBR, the SECP, and tech companies just couldn't flourish. And now we have the same issue with freelancers, which is about $1.5 billion in revenue, which is not coming back to the country. So the Prime Minister was presented with a fast-track program on tech. And I'm going to differentiate tech in two ways. The word Digital Pakistan was an initiative not for growth of IT industry overseas. Digital meant transformation of technology transformation of the ministries, right? So that was what was Digital Pakistan. You probably remember a resource from the Prime Minister about 2-3 years ago, Tanya. And that mandate was very, very important. And I'll tell you how it relates to your internal growth. If you don't automate the ministries, you're not going to get good governance. If you're not going to get good governance, you're not going to get transparency, and you're not going to attract FDI. So that was one of the things that was holding Pakistan back, that the government was not spending on domestic IT, which is very different from our neighboring countries because they've spent billions of dollars. Our government doesn't even close come to $1 billion. Our largest spenders in tech are the banks and the telcos and the armed forces, right? That's about $800 million right there. The federal government and the provincial government spend very less. So you're not going to get that technology transfer. So that's one huge opportunity for American companies. Mentioned Ambassador Masood, and I think the special representative mentioned private sector. So that needs to come in. The other of how to service the global IT market, which is now sitting at about almost $5 trillion in IT services. So, and 3 billion honestly doesn't mean anything because when I came back to Pakistan in 2003, left Silicon Valley, IBM, we were at about 200 million. And so in tech, you'd say, yeah, that's growth, you know, small growth. Uzair also said, Year on year, you're growing. Okay, that's a positive, but not when you look at our manpower and what we're producing. We've got 230 universities, about a 60-40 split in public-private sector. Tens of thousands of students are coming out, but HSC is another thing that I won't go into right now, but we actually can have fast-track programs, and no, the tech companies globally aren't going to wait for a 4-year degree. So let me make that point very clear. Tech resources are required. Forrester's latest report, by 2030, the world has a shortage of 80 million. Where can Pakistan leverage our relationship with the US? And that's where STZA came in. So in the presentation of the Prime Minister was the need for the diaspora. I think Ambassador Masood mentioned there's about 1 million. So we mapped out, prior to the Act of Parliament, how many tech large or mid-sized companies that are servicing their offshore businesses globally and in Pakistan. So very few had them in Pakistan, but our diaspora, particularly sitting in the valley, was very high. And no government in the past had done an exercise to map out to invite them back. So we got a lot of information on what requirements they need for an enabling environment. Of course, land. The federal government owns land in the large cities, because you can't have tech cities in the rural sector. No one's going to travel out there, right? Then FBR issue of taxes, repatriation of profits. So that was a state bank issue. Registration, SECP. So the law, which I've shared with Uzair, and I think he'll be able to share it all with you. It's only a 20-page document. It's called the STZ Act of Parliament. Allows all incentives that are globally competitive now. So I'm not going to list them through because they're long, but at the high level, it allows for XYZ company, whether American, whether Chinese, and I mentioned Chinese because I'll explain what happened when we opened up, to come in, set up shop, subsidize land, you don't have to pay up front, in large parcels in the main cities of Lahore, Islamabad, Karachi, and KPK. And the investment interest, when the act was actually, it's been a year only. It was last October that it was passed in both houses. So the positive side is all the political parties were on board. It was a loose coalition, but the question of the former PM got everyone on board and declared tech as a strategic priority for the economic diversification. Because our large groups, and of course the CEO of the Pakistan Business Council is also here, the large groups have made money in the large sectors of course, sugar, cement, textiles. Tech was not their forte. So one of the questions that the diaspora came up with was, if there's FDI, why aren't the local groups investing with us? You know, you need your domestic investor to have confidence in his or her own country for the FDI to also come in. So the analysis that we did was of 5 large groups out of the Pakistan Business Council, these I won't name them, gave a commitment in excess of $100 million in investments. And in fact, the first groups that came out were from the US. The second, of course, that's why I mentioned China. So your 2 good partners, and Ambassador Masood would have been thrilled to see, because he's the one who introduced myself to the Tsinghua University back in the think tank days. We had 4,500 companies of Chinese to come and set up zones in these large land parcels. And we had American diaspora flying in, ready, committed with money to set up zones as well. So that's the positive side. I can't actually name in this forum which ones did come, but think of the highest level. You can probably guess who visited Pakistan, commitments made to the PM. So now why did that happen is the law itself, right? The Act of Parliament has its own courts. So a lot of investors are worried about lawsuits in the country. So when the Googles of the world want to come up, set up a data center, the Data Privacy Act that Uzair you alluded to, those all are handled by STZA. So it takes about 2 to 3 months to get a license. And what it is that there's 2 licenses. It's for zone developers and zone enterprises, right? Large companies that are in both can come up and get a license. It takes about 6 weeks to get a license. Pretty straightforward process. There was a question on whether it's going to take a real estate play. Absolutely not. The Act doesn't allow it. However, there are real estate companies that build tech zones. So if they qualify as zone developer, they come in and build the infra. where the tech companies just move in, whether you're a startup, whether you're an incubator. And now I'm in the private sector after I left. I can't find space in Islamabad. So I was hoping that our zone would have opened up, but that regime change question I get Rabia can answer that later on at dinner time. But things have slowed down a bit, but the act is there. We're hopeful. In our first 6 months after the act was passed, we reached close to $1 billion of investment. So having said that, I think that's extremely positive. The lead have been, to be quite honest, not the DC area, but have been our diaspora sitting in the Valley, Chicago, Boston, and New York. I did meet a couple of people from Virginia, Maryland, and DC that are also willing to come in. But probably the strongest technology transfer will be from our tech diaspora sitting in the US. There's no doubt about it. China, of course, they've got a lot of cash. They were very interested in chip design. Pakistan has a bunch of electrical engineers that don't make high salaries. China was lacking in that resource, and so they've offered to come in and build drones for chip design. And the other diversification that Pakistan needs is from software, it has to go into turnkey tech solutions, right? Software is a billable service. So that's been our forte, and as Uzair shared, we reached about almost 3 billion this year. So billing man hours will not be enough. You have to win large outsourcing contracts. You have to run data centers. You need systems management. You need systems integration. You need cyber. And that can only happen when you have large-scale infrastructure and an act of parliament, which we do have now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Amir, I'll come back to you on some of the legal stuff because I have a question on that. But before I do that, Monica, I want to bring you into this conversation. You look at emerging markets and markets that are at times similar to Pakistan, maybe a bit more mature, maybe not so. And there's this question of global winter in the technology ecosystem. Money is not easy to come by anymore. What are some of the things you're seeing globally impacting this space in emerging markets, and how are emerging market startups dealing with this tighter environment globally?
Thank you. Well, and we actually do invest in Pakistan as well, so I'll speak to both the global and what we see in Pakistan. Thank you for having me, Monica Brand-Engel, one of the co-founders of Kona Capital, which is a venture firm focused on fintech for inclusion in emerging markets. So all we do is fintech, and we focus exclusively on markets like Pakistan, which we look at like we do at Indonesia, a very interesting, exciting frontier market. And our goal is to bridge gaps. So Kona means something in every region where we work, and the whole idea that we believe is actually there is an opportunity here, even in wintertime. I thought your opening remarks were quite telling. We actually love times like these. It's a great buying opportunity. So our backgrounds as founders have been, we've been on both sides of the table, meaning we've been entrepreneurs. I'm half Peruvian, have worked in Mexico, South Africa, India. Never had the pleasure of building a startup in Pakistan yet, but we come from the perspective of actually having started, scaled, and exited financial service and technology companies in emerging markets. So the idea of being an investor now on the other side, and how do you create an enabling environment where these fintechs can thrive. So Amir, I thought your comments were quite telling that you do need to have the macro environment well established, and that could be rule of law, regulation. I mean, fintech is an area, whether it's e-money licenses, digital signatures, digital banking, all of these areas require setting up rules of the game. And if those are not set up, it's very hard to ask an investor to put money at risk. And actually, I think Pakistan is quite progressive. If we look at markets, if you look at regulatory bodies, we actually, there are initiatives that we support through our partner Acción. We actually support global regulatory initiatives where we exchange lessons learned on how do you create an enabling environment where entrepreneurship can thrive. And actually, Pakistan has always been, I would say, on the forefront of being very thoughtful in terms of creating regulation, at least on the financial inclusion side. I won't speak to technology writ large, but if you think about bottoms up, meaning how do you create an environment where risk-taking can be done intelligently, because financial service is in some ways a public good. There's depository implications, and so this idea of creating even responsible lending environments, digital banking environments, we have found Pakistan quite an interesting market. We only have one investment there now, But it has been, if you look at it, and I thought your comments that most of that 700 million capital has come in the last 2 years. It's certainly been our experience as well. We are a very thesis-driven investor, so we identify business models that we think have a disproportionate probability of radically improving access and quality of financial services to the unbanked. So we're investing in technology with the idea of bringing those that are on the margins into the mainstream. So even in the geopolitical discussion that I benefited hearing in the end of right before this panel is the idea of actually if you can bring those who have been marginalized into the mainstream, you actually, in terms of sharing the economic benefits, sharing the life improvement benefits, that's how you really make real change. And so we really do believe that the kinds of startups we see, and so to answer some of your questions, we see very similar themes in Pakistan. The companies that have attracted some of that capital are very similar to markets in others. Example, we have in our fund too, we have something called B2B e-commerce. So that is, how do you set up e-commerce for small businesses so you can digitize supply chains that are very people and paper intensive? And it could be as basic as having an app. So if I'm a merchant on a corner shop, and I normally, and this could be in Kenya, Indonesia, or in Pakistan, before the companies that were created, I would get up at 4 a.m., walk physically to a distributor to pick up the goods I need, stock my shelves. I do that every day. And the days I do that means I have to close my shop while I go and restock my shelves. And if my customer comes in and I happen to run out, I have to wait till I restock again. If you have an app where you say, actually, I want to order this amount of milk or potato chips, and the idea if I can do that digitally, all of a sudden, not only does it reduce my time of closing my shop, it lets the supplier know, oh, I see demand rising. I can actually begin stocking that distributor in a more time-efficient way. So there are all these efficiencies. So that's called B2B e-commerce. We have 3 portfolio companies in our portfolio now, one in Kenya that serves all of Africa called Wasoko, one in Indonesia called Ula, and actually one in Egypt. And in Pakistan, Bazaar, Tajir, Retailer, there's 4 I can mention right now that have received hundreds of millions of dollars of financing. And so I think that number actually might be low. It sounds, because those 4 companies alone raised about 80, 90 million on just 4. But the point being that the same themes and theses we see in emerging markets, the most exciting emerging markets, we see happening in Pakistan. So there is, in spite of the winter, and I do want to, again, I'm an optimist by nature, as probably my comments, I'm talking very optimistically after we're in a very difficult time in Pakistan. And it's because I see the points of light. These points of light, they need to feed their families, they have aspirations, and these points of light keep working even when there's a lot of clouds in the horizon. So we focus on the points of light. How do we help them? How do we support them? Through cross-border learning, through our capital, through influencing regulators. So we actually, for example, in Egypt, which I spend more time in, I actually moved my family to Cairo earlier this year, working very much with the Egyptian government, also trying to create an enabling environment through fintech regulation. They're hungry to hear what has learned. What are the implications if I set this policy? What happens if I get more lax about allowing a signature to be electronic versus a wet signature, they describe it. So these learnings, again, it's not risk-free, and there are implications. And even the banks themselves, I thought it was interesting your comment. You said that, Amir, that the majority of IT investment are banks, telecoms, and defense. I think that actually is very true, again, globally, that banks are making investments, and so they're very threatened by these fintechs. So even in terms of how do we progress, sometimes we have to find bridges to build among people who feel very threatened by some of this innovation. So it's not a simple process, but we do believe that there are models, whether it's Brazil, which has really transformed economically through investment in technology, India, Indonesia, there are markets that we have invested in that have been very successful for us and have allowed our LPs, our folks like Goldman Sachs and Mass Mutual, we have very blue chip institutional investors whose money we've been entrusted with to invest in this venture activity. And so it really requires, I would call it a nuanced, level-headed approach to venture capital and a level-headed, responsible approach to investing and backing entrepreneurship. And again, I want to be respectful of time. I'm happy to talk about other theses we see. There have been some failures. So Airlift is the famous one where they burned through $90 million. So there's also lessons what not to do. And there, again, I blame the investors as much as the entrepreneur in that mistake. So sometimes investors there are definitely bad lessons from Silicon Valley that should not be emulated. So happy to talk about what you shouldn't do as what you think you can do. But and maybe the last thing I'll say, just to be sober and realistic, that winter is being felt in Pakistan. You feel it most on the follow-on capital. So some of those investors, some of those entrepreneurs who were very successful in the last 2 years in raising good rounds of capital, and maybe were not as disciplined, it's called grow it at all costs, maximizing top-line revenue and not thinking about unit economics. That's very silly, but people do it. And so you get things like Airlift, where you burn through $90 million in 2 years and it's gone. So there's certainly models that we don't want to emulate. I think there are a lot of interesting models in Pakistan. And I'll mention another one, Abi, which is a digital payments company. So digital payments, B2B e-commerce, some of the logistics. I think there are interesting developments in Pakistan that we're quite excited about.
Thank you for that, Monica. And the last three things you mentioned in terms of the verticals, I almost see a finance minister in Pakistan salivating at unlocking those three, right? If you combine logistics with B2B, e-commerce, and digital payments, all of a sudden the retail ecosystem is formalized. And this whole pushback that Pakistan keeps getting from the IMF to issue a tax on retailers, and it doesn't go anywhere for political reasons. If you digitize it, it all goes away, leads to a lower rate actually, and a lower rate of taxation and a higher rate of compliance. So maybe it's something that from a strategic perspective should be looked at in terms of macroeconomic issues as well. Shazi, I want to bring you into this conversation. You, of course, have been working in both the energy and the fintech sectors in Pakistan. Not the easiest ones to operate in, especially the combination of the two, energy and fintech. So share with us a bit about your experience doing business in Pakistan, what the actual ease of doing business environment is, and where do you see things going given the broader macro context globally, but also domestically in Pakistan, where there's just so much uncertainty at this point in time.
Okay, can you hear me? Well, Ozair, first of all, I really just want to thank you and commend you. I really am enjoying this panel, and I like how you've set it up from the macro to the investor, and now I'm excited to give sort of the startup perspective of somebody who's been working on the ground in Pakistan for the last decade. I've been working on energy issues for the last 20 years. I started my career at the World Bank, looking at different sorts of international development models, things that have been done in sub-Saharan Africa. And I decided to start working on energy access issues in Pakistan about a decade ago because I saw solar technology improving and the costs starting to come down. And I really saw an opportunity for rural electrification using solar if we could figure out a social enterprise model for financing solar for people and making it affordable for these off-grid communities. So that's sort of where I started with figuring out how we can, of course, it was not capital efficient. We were doing it off of our own balance sheet, so we were limited in how many people we could finance. But we thought if we could make solar affordable for people living in rural villages, then this would be a really great opportunity to electrify these people and not have to have them wait for grid expansion, which could take, maybe 20 years. That's definitely a lifetime for a child or for a family. So that's where I started. But as I was doing this work on the ground in Pakistan, we started getting approached by other people. We started getting approached by farmers, rice mill owners, sugar mill owners, small factory owners in the rural areas, and then people in urban areas, not just residential customers, but factory owners. Energy access is really important for everybody, but the price of electricity has doubled over the past decade in Pakistan, and then it's gone up like 40% more just over the past couple of months. So people are really, really hurting. The price of solar has come down 90% in the last decade, and people are starting to really view it as a viable way. Once net metering was enabled in between 20 and 15, I would say it really took off in 2018. What that meant is that the government put forward an initiative that said that people can now generate power on their own rooftops and push it back into the grid. And it's not as progressive as it is in the US, where the utility company is forced to cut you a check for what excess power you're producing and pushing into the grid, but they will have to give you an electricity credit. And for somebody in Pakistan whose electricity bill is, you know, $100 or $200 or sometimes $250 a month, that's a lot. So if you can invest into something, if you could save up all of your money and purchase a solar system, a 10 kilowatt, 15 kilowatt system, and get that reduction and get your electricity bill down to zero, that all of a sudden became a very compelling value proposition to them. So what happened over the last couple of years is that a number of people started, there was an explosion in people who wanted solar. Now, a typical system is anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000, and not that many people have that much money lying around. So what you saw is an explosion of installer distributors for solar, of which we were one. And in the beginning, there was only very few of us, but in the last couple of years, now there's 1,000. So I've been viewing this problem from many, many different angles. And the biggest problem now, it's kind of taking me full circle to where I started, which is that there will be an unleashing. A lot more people will be able to afford solar if we can provide financing to them. And preferably this time around off balance sheet financing for them. That will really give a lot of people the opportunity to get solar onto their rooftop and to reduce their electricity bill. And they could pay off their loan in anywhere from 1 to 2.5 years. And so what I did was I looked at the entire sector, and once the government started putting forth these pretty progressive regulations, I would say, enabling the fintech industry to sort of like begin to blossom in Pakistan. This was a game changer for the space, because I think the government has started to recognize that people need, you need consumer funding, you need access to mortgages, you need asset finance, you need credit. You need to be able to have access to money and to be able to access a loan that you can pay off over time. Now, investors know that there's a golden triangle, right? That makes up the enabling environment for startups. First, people start looking at e-commerce. Then you need to figure out the logistics of how are you going to get products delivered online to people. So they start investing into logistics company. But I would say the most important sector to invest in is the fintech sector, because the fintech is what enables money to move around, to pay for those goods, not just consumer goods, but any goods. We're talking about like a mid-market asset, smaller than a mortgage, obviously, smaller than a car, bigger than a consumer good. And so now fintech licenses are being given out by the government. It's not all good news. It's very exciting. It's very exciting to be in the startup space in Pakistan. There has been a lot of money. It's definitely slowing down, but there's still a lot of interest because, as Monica said, Pakistan has looked very much like a new frontier market, similar to where Indonesia was maybe like 6 to 10 years ago. And so there's a lot of interest from investors where I didn't have several years ago. And now for smart startups who are not feeling beholden to or under pressure to grow at all costs, if you can figure out a way to balance, what your costs are, what your needs are, what the actual opportunity is from potential customers, then I think that this is a really great opportunity for startups and investors to slow down a little bit and figure out which partnerships make more sense, where you're mission aligned. So there's been a couple of different solar finance models that have worked very well. There's Mosaic in the US, there's Bright in Australia. And then in emerging markets, a little bit more similar to Pakistan, there's Solfacil, who started out similarly to where we started out as a distributor. And now they're working to create a fintech to lift up the entire sector, to provide solar finance for the entire sector. And this is the model that I'm working to replicate in Pakistan, because there is a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of pain for the customer. This is not a luxury good. Electricity is not a luxury good. This is something that people really need. So I'm very excited and very happy at this time. There's a lot of progressive regulations, and there's a lot of things that we need that we'll talk about in the next question. But yeah, it's a really exciting time to be a startup in Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Shazia. And in terms of access to credit for rural households and clean electricity, right? Again, my mind is swirling with the potential of creating credit histories, which then unlocks even more access to credit, especially in rural households. And if we have to deal with this issue of climate change and resilient infrastructure, particularly in rural Pakistan, in places like Sindh and Balochistan, you need access to finance. And if you make them creditable, bankable citizens as part of the formal network, all of a sudden you will see an explosion in the rural economy, which Pakistan desperately needs. And again, energy access is front and center in that. So thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. Mohammed, I want to bring you into this conversation and sort of moving through from policy to EM to startup. You have deep expertise running companies that are on the export side of the equation, on the innovation side of the equation. Share with us and the audience what that experience running a company in Pakistan has been like in terms of the technology ecosystem. What are you seeing working in the innovation landscape? And what perhaps is next in terms of your perspective?
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure being here and seeing many familiar faces. Very exciting being at a conference on technology in Pakistan. As you correctly pointed out, it's nice to see Pakistan through a different lens as to compared to, I guess, what is customarily the case. We have been involved as TRG in Pakistan and in Pakistan's technology sector for the last 20 years or so. A few words about TRG. We are structured as an investment holding company, and we operate through multiple portfolio companies. These companies, in one way, shape, or form, are part of the broader technology sector. And the one thing that all of them have in common is that we have deployed, to the extent possible, a significant resource pool in Pakistan. Most of our companies have their clients primarily in the US. And I would say they make up over US clients, US enterprise clients make up about over 90% of our overall revenues. Just as was becoming clear from the discussion and the goings on in Pakistan over the last few years, the domestic technology scene has been extremely exciting. And I think there's a lot of runway within that particular sector. It's not a sector in which I hold deep expertise. I'm going to pivot to the export sector, but I think I should mention that for those people who sort of mention the large amounts of money that have flowed into through the VC industry into Pakistan, I mean, as a percentage of GDP, those figures are still very low. Pakistan has even in its highest year, 2021, VC investment in Pakistan was 0.1% of GDP. The global sort of average, even emerging to developed markets, has been between 0.5% to 1.5%. So we have some ways to go. There are reasons why it is low. Exits are, you don't have developed capital markets. Exits are difficult to come by. But having said all of that, clearly there's a lot of room. There's a lot of room for e-commerce. Our e-commerce as a percentage of GDP is half that of our neighbor, for example, our neighbor to the east. But moving to the export side, which is what, Uzair, you were talking about, clearly that's where tremendous potential exists in Pakistan. And this is kind of game-changing potential, macro potential that we're talking about. For the longest period of time, for most of my professional career, I remember Pakistan's overall exports as being between $20 to $30 billion. Against that, we have an import bill as a country of about 65. The gap is made up by remittances. Our IT exports, IT and broader IT-enabled services exports are approximately 3 billion, as people pointed out. India is at 150 billion. The Philippines, a country with which I'm fairly familiar by virtue of our presence there, is about $30 billion or so. So we have a long way to go, and especially given the human capital base that exists within the country. I mean, if you were to just look at it simply on a prorated basis compared to India, or perhaps even use the Philippines as some sort of a baseline, I mean, the figure of 20 billion is certainly not out of of what can be envisaged. And as you can just work the math, how tremendously consequential that can be for the macroeconomy, not to mention the hundreds of thousands of people that would get employed within the sector. Now, what are some of those issues that we have encountered at TRG? We have about 8,000 people working in the country in the technology sector. We export about $100 million of services out of Pakistan on an annual basis. About 6,000 of those are in the IT-enabled services, so the business process outsourcing industry. About 2,000 of those are in the software space. I would say the number one issue, and here I'm talking more about outsourcing because our software people, the people who work on software services don't export to identified clients. These are people who are developing products and capabilities for ourselves and for portfolio companies that are based in the US. So in a certain sense, we're not taking orders from, let's say, an IBM and providing that out of Pakistan. On the outsourcing side, on the other hand, we're directly in front of clients pitching Pakistan. I would say of the revenue, if I look at the amount of effort that we have had to put in for every dollar of export revenue, and I compare the effort related to Pakistan compared to the effort of exporting IT-enabled services from the Philippines or Jamaica, it's probably 5 times harder. And the reasons are manifold, but the primary reason, I would say, it just by an order of magnitude is the risk perception of Pakistan. All the other stuff about infrastructure, about human capital, et cetera, that pales in significance compared to just getting over that mental barrier, especially at the enterprise level. I mean, we have had tremendous success in the freelance world. I think from the statistics that I understand, Pakistan makes up number 3 or number 4 in terms of presence on freelance platforms in terms of developers and volume. So clearly, the enterprising people that we have at an individual level have worked wonders and have overcome all sorts of issues in terms of global payments and the like in terms of making their presence known. On the other hand, with large enterprise clients, just getting them over that mental barrier, the headlines, CNN, et cetera, the last 20 years, all of those things are a significant issue. And I think that's going to take time, but all these current headlines certainly don't help because they just continue to create this perception of instability. So for that, we have had to use, the way we worked out our business model from the get-go was to create, rather than have organic exports out of Pakistan, was to opt for a more capital-intensive model, which was to have, I guess, front-end companies in the US that we had acquired or incubated, and then use those in order to try and develop export markets out of Pakistan. And I would say it was pretty tough going over the years. I won't bore you. I'm happy to share some of those stories offline. But I would say there was a shift, a positive shift with the start of the pandemic. As physical presence became less relevant, people were willing to place orders just simply by virtue of virtual, I guess, a virtual interface. We were able to, I would say, triple our exports out of Pakistan, particularly in the IT-enabled services space, where clients, but again, these were not fresh clients that we got. These were clients that we had that we were servicing out of other locations, the Philippines, et cetera. In terms of human capital, I would say, I'll take one of the largest retail, I guess, actors in the world is a client of ours, and we were servicing them out of other locations, and they are very transparent in the way they categorize and rank the quality of service delivery. They take all the various outsourcers they're working with, all the locations they're working with, that they're drawing services from, and they provide a monthly ranking. Our location out of Lahore, which started shortly after the pandemic, as they were constrained for service delivery because of shutdowns in many of the markets they were operating in. So we spotted an opportunity and were able to step in. In Pakistan, we didn't have the types of lockdowns that, at least not in this industry, the government made an exception, which was very far-sighted on their part. So our Lahore location, out of the 30 locations that this particular client has, was number 2 after 3 months. And that just gives some idea of the quality of human capital that we have in country. Now, we could argue that human capital will probably get saturated. We know the statistics, 20,000 people 20,000 technologists that graduate every year. Only a fifth of them are really employable in the export industry, et cetera, et cetera. But still, I think that the gap that exists between what we actually do in terms of exports and what's possible is still, there's a lot of slack in the system. So I would say that's the opportunity that is in front of us as a country, and I think that the next, I guess, S-curve that we have to get onto is to go beyond the low-hanging fruit that we are currently exploiting, the freelancers, et cetera, and really to penetrate the enterprise markets. There, the project management capabilities, middle management, all of those types of skills become important. In the outsourcing space, where these considerations are also relevant, it took us a few years to have middle management in Pakistan that could go toe-to-toe against middle management that you would find in India or the Philippines. But it was just, once you get the virtuous cycle going, it'll just be a few years, and you will have catch-up taking place. The key, I guess, the key constraint for which I don't have an answer other than the fact that we'll just have to work through it, is to solve that perception issue.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I want to bring in the audience, and Misha, if you can grab one of the mics from me, and I'll do a quick question for all of you while we get the mics out. And you can take it in whatever order you want, but if you had to pick, let's say, 2 tactical things that had to happen in Pakistan to take it to the next level. Let's talk about leveling up, as the ambassador was saying earlier. What would that be? I'm trying to get a wish list out of all of you in terms of, like, what does Pakistan need to do in the broader tech ecosystem to level up and realize that runway, Mohammed, for example, that you were talking about, Amir, you were talking about the potential, we're only getting started. What needs to happen tactically?
Myself?
Yeah, we can go around the... All right. Yeah.
I think the number one priority, being in the country now for 19 years, is the level of contracts we're signing. So I talked about digitalization of the government. So it's so important for good governance, right? And the government just doesn't spend money. The ministries, we have about 46 ministries. If I take 2 examples of ministries, and then this is a good platform to push because you're a think tank, is there's a Ministry of Science and Technology, right? And it has 17 institutions, very large under it. Ministry of Information Technology and Telecommunications has 11. So that's 28 institutions in 2 ministries that get large budgets, but the outcome is not there. So one, you said two strategic. So one is that the government needs to implement digital plans for the transformation for ease of doing business, right? So you've heard of an organization called the BOI. You heard of SECP. NADRA is not doing bad. I'd rate NADRA as probably one of the best in terms of their IT services. But you can bring down 46 ministries to probably half if you go digital, right? And that's, of course, we get into another debate about the bureaucratic reforms that are needed in the country. So if that can happen, and money is spent there, and you bring in partners, Estonia has done it very well. Of course, Saudi Arabia learned from that, and now Dubai is doing it. So I was just in GITEX last 2 weeks ago. Fantastic program that we've got. And now how that happens, we don't have expertise in Pakistan how to do digital transformation. So you have to partner with foreign companies, you got to do lessons learned, you got to do business process re-engineering, and then put the technology platforms later on. Second is we have to start thinking like the Wipro, like the Infosys, like the Tatas, of getting large-scale contracts back to Pakistan. What do I mean by that? If you don't get these zones up and running, TRG, I know for the last 2 decades, if you look at their growth, and they've got wide reach. Zia and I went to high school together, you know. So I know his days when Apple computers came out and when he made the first company called Align. But he hasn't been able to get to the $1 billion mark of revenue. So how did the Wipros, Tatas, they're a good example, because we have some of this staff augmentation that they do, is you need tier 4 data centers, you need these zones, you need these incentives, you need the government to intervene and let the private sector run it. So that's why the STZA is very, very important. And I stress on that because all it does is it allows a land of parcel where the triple helix model comes in, the academia, of course the corporate, and the government, And Pakistani universities have so much land, anyone who's visited these universities, and the buildings aren't utilized. So you've got the professors, you've got the manpower, and allow the private sector bring in the companies and start going for that $50 million deal, the $100 million deal. You're not going to get to 20 billion that was being referred to if you don't get to structuring. For example, Deutsche Bank spends about $4 billion a year on IT. HSBC spends about $7 billion. So the large growth in the tech sector in our side of the world has been tapping into the global IT spend, products aside, because fintech is just an enabler. But Pakistan has to get in running IT systems globally. We do it well for our own country, but at very small scale. So those would be my two strategic that on a war footing needs to be done, right? Because we don't have that economic diversification yet.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Others want to chime in terms of their wish list? Monica?
My wish list is very simple, is currency stability. It's a big headwind. We haven't mentioned it, but it's a huge headwind for us.
Thanks, Monica. Okay, my wish list would be local manufacturing capacity would be really great, because we have mostly we import our products from China, and they regularly get stuck at the border, and even though there's tax incentives and waivers and things like that, there's a lot of inconsistency between how between policies that the AEDB puts forth and then how FBR decides whether or not they're going to honor them at the border. So and right now we're having a huge problem. You know, sometimes there's a GST that's applied to a panel, and then people fight, and then they repeal that, but now it's on the inverter. That's still having a net effect of making it really difficult for me to import my product. But if we could manufacture them locally, all of the components, and have them assembled, that would bring a lot of people jobs. It would give them skills. And then to your point, Mohammed, I think it would also be really helpful if we had training centers, maybe if we had some diaspora, if we had people from the diaspora who are really skilled, who are training people, like upskilling them with the types of, the types of skills that they needed to become middle managers, that'd be really fabulous for me too, because we get lots and lots of applications from, potential employees, but it's a lot of work to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. And really, if there were training centers that could upskill everybody, that would just lift everybody up. So, yeah.
Thank you. Mohammed?
Yeah, thanks, Uzair. For want of sounding like a broken record, I would say the first item in the wish list is clearly on the stability / perception side. I think that would solve so many issues. I do think I take Amar's point on the fact that it would be nice to have areas and zones where, and I think if we were to get on a nice runway, those would be extremely beneficial. I do think, though, that right now, I mean, if I just look at infrastructure that we have been able to tap into, clearly it's not of the same quality as what you would find in places, again, like, for example, the Philippines, but it's largely sufficient. In Karachi, for example, we needed to expand our space. We got an 11-story building. We spent a little bit of money upgrading it. The connectivity isn't really an issue. We have multiple fiber optic cables that go into the country. We have redundancy at the local level as well. So I would say the real issue is having clients that are willing to tap into that capability that we offer. I'd just mention a word about the role of the diaspora. We have an incredibly supportive diaspora. Every single large corporate where we've had well-placed people within our diaspora that we have approached have been very, very helpful, but they at the same time have often relayed back to us, hey, listen, I'm willing to take a position on my own in terms of advocating for service delivery out of Pakistan, but at a corporate level, I really have to adhere to or go by what the corporate view on service delivery out of Pakistan is. So that's a key item of the wish list, and that goes way beyond, I guess, myself here, because we know all the interests at play that create, unfortunately, that perception, the second point, at a more tactical level that I would mention, comes to human capital, because that's the second item. Now, of course, we all know about the depth of human capital and the promise we have in the country, but we also saw in 1 year, in 2021, when $300 million of venture capital came into the country, I would say 60 to 70% of it was spent or continues to be spent on salaries. So we saw how the market couldn't respond immediately, and you had salaries that went up, that doubled, in some cases tripled, depending on the levels that you were talking about. It's very difficult for anybody to develop a business model when you have salaries going up 2 to 3x in 1 year. So I am quite confident, and knowing the entrepreneurial capabilities within Pakistanis and the mercantile mindset that exists in the country, that there would be a response of the market in terms of, I guess, making available more qualified human capital. I don't see that as a significant barrier, but it would be helpful if somehow the output of, I guess, of institutions, and especially quality output within educational institutions, were to go up, because that's the second, I guess, big enabler in the industry.
Thank you. I'm mindful of time, so I'll take a round of questions, but Monica, I knew you had to run, and we're at 12. Okay. All right, so we'll take a round of questions. Yes. Please keep it short and a question, not a comment. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's an excellent question. What I would add, though, and suggest is that either that question is better for the first panel that we already had, or the one tomorrow, because we're talking about technology, not Chinese debt traps. So, but that's an excellent question. Any other questions? Yes, Amin. Any other questions? One in the back there, please.
Hello, I'm a MAI student. My question is to the representative from TIG. You pointed out an interesting point about shifting towards capital-intensive, technology and initiatives that can boost up the growth. My point is, if you shift towards capital-intensive technology, that more often than not bids up the production price, and in that case, how do you think the firms would be able to cope up with the increased price? Because that kind of, deteriorates your position in terms of competitiveness, price competitiveness. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first question on hurdles to financial inclusion, anybody wants to take that first?
I'll start, and I am going to apologize and depart after I speak. I actually think Pakistan's taking some of those important steps. So, the old regime was very much like India. You had a strong state bank really protecting the banks, or maybe better said, overly conservative regarding what we call prudential regulation. And I think some of the initiatives, for example, they have a request for proposal right now to issue a digital banking license. There's 9 applicants. I think they're going to award 5. I think that will be transformative in terms of really expanding the types of fintechs and the types of services they're able to offer. So I think it's mostly a regulation and a liberalization on experimentation, number one. Number two, I would call them regulatory sandboxes, which again, the Pakistani regulators have done, I think, experimenting in a constrained way so that you allow to see some of the fears that sometimes restrict what is enabled goes away. And then third, I don't actually know e-invoicing. You mentioned this earlier. It's a very important e-invoicing. So Mexico has done this. Brazil, there's a number of countries that actually have established a requirement. And actually Saudi Arabia just required this, where you actually legislate that small businesses have to print a digital invoice. And what that does is not only stop under the table activity, it actually creates a database so you can see trading activity. So if you're a lender, you actually have a digitized corroboratable point that you can analyze what's the cash flow of this company. I can lend against working capital. So there are a number of things. So the answer is actually just seeing some of the experimentation that's been done by the neighbor. Another fourth one is instant payments. So India has done that, Brazil has done that. That, you know, it actually really changes the acceptance environment. So there's a bunch of things. If you want to really promote financial inclusion, there are a number of digital strategies that have been proven in many emerging markets. I've just gone through 4. Happy to talk about others, but I think there's a lot to be done. But I actually think Pakistan is experimenting.
Yeah, I'd love to speak to that. So there's two things, and I'll try to give you really concrete examples of what's happening. One thing is that we have a digital lending product. We have to generate our own credit score for a customer. Some elements of that credit score, we can come by those data points digitally, but there's a number of them that we still can only get manually. So the digitization is incredibly important for us to figure out, to generate a credit score and figure out who's creditworthy and who isn't. So that's just going to take some time. Other than that, the issue is that there are commercial banks that have long-standing relationships with the State Bank of Pakistan. And so there's financing products, concessionary financing products, for instance. There was a 6% interest loan for solar. And that's only available through the commercial banks. Well, the commercial banks really weren't making enough money off of it. So even though less than 2% of all solar has been financed in Pakistan, and there was a great opportunity to finance more, there was no uptake, no customers, because the banks made it so difficult and so hard to get that loan approved. They just, they just upped the barriers to approve customers because it really wasn't worth it for them. If they instead would allow a company like us or other companies to come into that space and get access to the concessionary financing that the banks were getting for that particular product, that we have the technical capability to deploy that product, monitor that product, generate the credit score. If they would let a specialized player, a specialized fintech access that same, concessionary financing, we could do things a lot more quickly. But they have these long-standing and antiquated practices and just long-standing relationships with the bank that make it very difficult for us to break into, even if we get the lending license. So those are the hurdles. They might not seem like it might not seem on the face of it that they exist, but those in practice are the things that we're up against.
Amir, you want to chime in?
Yeah, a quick answer. There's a soft battle going on between the fintechs and the large banks. We have about 40 banks in Pakistan. 6 are very large monopolized banks, right? So this will be disrupted. So in about a year, you'll see financial inclusion. The money that's been poured into fintech, and a lot of it is agri-fintech, right? Getting the small farmer the loans. The large banks don't do it. The mid-sized banks don't do it. The microfinance banks don't do that much, although we mentioned Khoshali. So they got money about a year ago, and now their software is up and running on mobile apps. In about a year's time, we'll see heavy disruption, is my projection. It'll take about another year.
And I would just add that all of us would love to see that disruption, because going to a bank in Pakistan is as if you're stealing their money, not giving them your money for safekeeping. So I hope that changes, and you're right. Mohammed, there was a question about capital-intensive switch. I don't know if you wanted to take that, but my understanding was that your capital-intensive was here in terms of org structure, but maybe you want to chime in on that.
Yeah, that's right. Just to clarify, when I meant capital-intensive, technology delivery out of Pakistan is actually is not that capital intensive if you compare it to other industries. What I had meant when I mentioned capital intensive was that we use capital in order to establish beachheads and I guess front ends in the US. That was the capital intensive part of what we did. In terms of the opportunity that exists for Pakistan, and in terms of what we get out of, I guess every dollar of capital deployed at a local level, I can't think of any better industry than the technology industry in terms of the cash generated per dollar of capital deployed. So hopefully that clarifies.
Thank you for that, and thank you to all our panelists for their wonderful comments and insights. I hope you all enjoyed the session. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. Thank you. And we have lunch in the back room, so please feel free to join us for lunch and network and chat with people, and we'll see you tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Thank you.